Good evening, Canby. Welcome to the Canby City Council and Planning Commission work session. Right now, we're going to pretty much call this a City Council work session with Planning Commission members as our guest, because we've not quite met a quorum of the Planning Commission yet. But tonight, we're here to do a work session to discuss the housing needs and economic opportunity assessment that's been going on as we near the completion of that, and then figuring out next steps and provide input on where we're at. So with moving forward with tonight's conversation, I'll turn it over to Don Hardy.
Good evening, Mayor Hodson, council members and commissioners. I'm glad to be here tonight. Before I start, I wanted to do some introductions here of our consulting team. I have Steve Faust here from 3J Consulting. They're handling the housing needs analysis, housing production strategy. Behind me, Todd Chase with FCS Group. He is the economist and employment person that's been hired. Just a little background on this. Maya, could we bring up the PowerPoint? Just a little background on this. I wanted us to start with kind of where we began on this. Second slide, please. This will kind of give a summary of a few items here. So the economic opportunities analysis and housing needs and housing production strategy were grants that were received from the Department of Land Conservation and Development. So city subsequently hired 3J Consulting and FCS Group to do the work. We kicked this work off in January of this year. The purpose of the work really is to look at the 20-year horizon of growth for the city of Canby, looking at populations projections from Portland State University for the next 20 years, as well as employment projections for the city and what the city should be. This information tonight I think hopefully will be very informative. There's a lot of information here tonight that we're going to go through at a pretty quick clip. But this all leads us to the update of the Comprehensive Plan and Transportation System Plan in the city, which is a 20-year plan for the city. Part of this process for the housing and economic opportunity assessment work we've involved stakeholders, and we've had one open house. Part of the process here going forward will continue to be keeping the public informed of this process, especially for the Comprehensive Plan and Transportation System Plan. Very critical that we have that input from the community as we move forward and look at the projections for the city and the population that's anticipated for the city and employment for the city. So I just wanted to give that background here. As we move forward on this, we'll be giving more updates for this. But with that, I'm going to turn it over to Steve Faust to start out the housing assessment work that we've completed to date.
Thank you, Don. Thank you, Mayor Hodson, councilors, and commissioners. One thing that, just to be clear, is that Todd from FCS Group is working on both the housing project as part of my team and then leading the economic development work. Let's go to the next slide, please. So there's two kind of main topics that we're looking at tonight, as you know. I'm going to start the discussion giving you some background information on the housing side of the assessment, and then Todd is going to walk you through the housing policy options that we've developed. That's one of the key things we want to focus on tonight is those housing policy options. And then Todd's going to continue and take you through the economy and employment section of the presentation, and there the real focus is on employment growth scenarios that he'll be presenting. Next slide, please. As Don mentioned, there are two housing projects that we're doing concurrently. The first is a housing needs analysis. That includes a housing trends forecast and population forecast to determine the housing need over a 20-year period. We'll talk just briefly tonight about if the city has a deficit of land, then you look at expanding your urban growth boundary and other measures inside your current urban growth boundary to address that need, and that's the situation we have here in Canby. The housing production strategy is focused more on what are the policies and tools that the city can implement in order to address that housing need. Not just focused on land and having enough land. That's the housing needs analysis. The housing production strategy is how can the city help make sure that the housing you need gets built. Next slide, please. And then on the economic opportunities analysis that Todd will go into, looking at the vision, the economic development vision, again, looking at those, the land supply issue, and then getting into policy goals and objectives. Next slide, please. Oh. And again, those employment growth scenarios is going to be the key piece of that part of the presentation. Just a few notes on community outreach. Next slide. So for both the housing and the economic development, we conducted a series of stakeholder interviews. One group we interviewed classified as housing producers, and this is all in the language that were given by the state. So they asked us to talk to housing producers and housing consumers. Some key points on the producer side. So these are developers and people in the housing development industry, realtors, folks like that. They identified a lack of incentives and guidance for affordable housing. They talked about maybe regulatory requirements being a barrier to getting the types of housing built that the city needs. Some existing zoning code items to look at to provide more flexibility. And then looking at concentrating higher density housing in the downtown area. Next slide, please. On the housing consumer side, we heard that many more varied types of housing units are desired. We heard about intergenerational housing and senior housing and home equity at the top of the concerns and the desires of residents. We heard a lot about, especially from the senior community that we interviewed, about the rental rates being too high relative to their incomes. And then looking at steps that the city can take to create and attract affordable housing. So we'll get more into those housing policy options in just a moment. Next slide, please. We did, as Don mentioned, have one public meeting to talk about housing and economic development. There's a few notes here. There was some mixed support for expansion of the urban growth boundary due to concerns about density and preserving prime farmland, and something we often hear in communities, the desire to keep the city as it is today. That's not unusual to hear. Some concerns that income growth is not keeping up with the cost of housing. That I think due to some recent state legislation about changing what is allowed, excuse me, in single-family home zones to allow different, more density in that zone. Concern about out-of-area investors buying up homes, raising the costs. Desire for the city to allow cottage clusters, and considering using tax increment financing as a way to pay down system development charges for affordable housing. Next slide, please. And then finally, just some other concerns that we heard at that public meeting: traffic congestion and quality of life, a lack of sidewalks and in some places traffic control systems, a lack of attainable housing supply for workers, the need for a coordinated long-term community vision and plan, some concern about design and landscaping standards, about warehousing and distribution businesses that maybe don't pay the wages that can sustain a family, and then sprawl, low-density development that isn't very pedestrian-friendly. So that's just some context of what we've heard from the community through our outreach thus far. Next slide, please. So now I'll just walk through some context from the housing analysis before Todd moves into those housing policy options. Next slide, please. So the population of Canby within the urban growth boundary is expected to grow by approximately nearly 6,000 people over the next 20 years. Next slide, please. We have a slide here that's just looking at trends by age and how that share is changing over time. So middle housing is something with a growing older population. Smaller housing options, what we known as middle housing, often are going to be something that's attractive to folks in that age bracket. Next slide, please. In terms of housing need, we translate that population growth and look at people per household, average household size, and calculate the number of housing units needed. And that number is 2,236 units over the next 20 years to accommodate growth. Market demand is strongest, as always, for single-family detached homes, and that's not changing. However, there is growing demand for, as I mentioned, smaller housing units, apartments, and middle housing, which includes things like cottage clusters, accessory dwelling units, townhomes, and then what we call plexes. That's really duplexes and then triplexes and fourplexes in that 2 to 4 range. The state considers multifamily or apartments to start at 5 units or more. Next slide, please. So when we translate that land need, or the need for those housing units into a land need, we get about 520 acres. And then we calculated the land supply, and it's at about 373 acres, which results in a deficit of about 146 acres. I'll mention that at this time in our demand, we included a lot, or in our inventory, we considered many parcels that are not developed yet, but are in what we call pipeline projects to be developed. That's what these numbers consider. We did get some recent guidance from the state that says that in order for us to consider those pipeline projects, to put them in the developed category, their bright line, as they call it, is that permits need to be issued for that parcel. So one thing we know about the housing needs analysis is that when a city needs to expand their urban growth boundary, excuse me, due to a land deficit, you're not allowed to adopt the housing needs analysis until the expansion is adopted. So those are adopted concurrently, the housing needs analysis and the urban growth boundary expansion. So we have some time here until the work's done on the UGB expansion and we get to that adoption point for the urban growth boundary expansion for some of these pipeline projects that maybe don't have permits yet to get permits. So these numbers will change over time during your comprehensive plan and TSP update process. So this is kind of a snapshot in time, but regardless, there's going to be a deficit and there's going to be cause to expand the urban growth boundary. Next slide, please. And with that, I'm going to hand it over to Todd to take you through the housing policy options and then the economic development portion of the presentation. Unless there's any questions on what
Just one.
Yeah.
Is my math correct, 6,000?
6,000 increase over 20 years, is that what you said?
A little less than, I think it was 5,300 or 930, something like that.
Okay, that's 300 a year, which is less than what we're having now. Are you
Yeah.
predicting a decrease in the rate of growth in population in Canby?
So by state regulations, we have to use the population projections that are given to us by Portland State University Population Research Center. So it's not as much us predicting that change as Portland State University predicting that change.
To piggyback on that,
Help me, Brian.
yes, sir. I'm gonna do my best. So I'm really gonna have a dialogue with you in that if history serves correct, Portland State's numbers have been A, accurate, B, inaccurate. What's your choice? B, inaccurate, in my opinion, for the last umpteen years. So I don't know. Current trend is probably going to dictate the future here for Canby, and I think 300 a year is a little light, and I think 6,000 overall is light. in my
Well,
opinion.
but our recent experience has been about 400 a year. And we are dying off in Canby at a rate of about 700 people a year. So, and again, are you suggesting that we can't trust the numbers that we're being told we have to use? I mean, how do we do policy development if you're saying you don't believe it?
I've always just been very hesitant to, with Portland State's numbers, you know, and so that's just been, I take it with a very big bag of salt in terms of what those numbers truly end up being. I mean, that's just me. I mean, what do we? I mean, that's what we have to follow. But I just think you take out a recession and you take out a pandemic. I mean, where does that put us? I mean, that's our best guide. I don't want us to be underestimating by too much, because then we're going to be scrambling in 10 years to maybe course correct, or 5 course correct where we're at. Sean, and then I'll come over to you, Sarah.
Well, even to further piggyback, my question is, do we know what matrix Portland State is using to come up with the projections, and are they taking into consideration the changes of 2016 when annexations changed? You know, we've grown at a higher rate, possibly because of ability to annex and having so much land. I wonder if they're considering those in their matrix of, you know, maybe slowing down once land is built out more.
Yeah, that's a good question. I am not intimately familiar with the calculations, how they do their population calculations. A couple thoughts are, number one, that over a 20-year period of time, you're going to see the surges and you're going to see slowdowns, and I know that they do include both of those considerations in their numbers. But unfortunately, Mayor Hodson, I think you're right in that both of these reports are kind of a snapshot in time, and because we're given these numbers, that's why 10 years from now, you do the analysis again and see where you're at. Unfortunately, in the case of Canby, you're going to need to base this urban growth boundary expansion on these numbers. So, if for cities that have a big surplus of land, it's not that big of a deal if the numbers are off. What we don't want is to see Canby needing to expand the urban growth boundary a second time 10 years from now. So it's a real concern.
Yeah, just to move a little bit further down the road on what Greg was saying, one of the things that's different when you talk about the next 20 years as opposed to the past 20 years is the aging. Like, we have a relatively older population than neighboring communities and other communities in the area. We definitely veer towards an older population, and we're going to be facing the baby boomer generation getting into their 80s and 90s finally, right? So I think that we have an older population in general. I did look at him. I did.
Her gaze just
You still have
happened
some
to go
time.
past you.
That as we're looking at what population growth looks like, we'll be disproportionately impacted by the aging baby boomer generation than many of the other communities in the area, both in how that impacts our death rate and how that impacts population growth, but also in our housing need.
Okay, I'm going to hand it over.
Sorry I got us off.
No, but it's a great. We ask that question often in terms of the.
We only have 30 minutes. I'm sorry. Please.
Yeah. They're all great questions, and this is a good time to ask them, so appreciate any questions about the growth assumptions. Unfortunately, we are required to use these numbers, and they do show a preliminary need to expand the UGB, which is a whole nother set of challenges and questions about where is it efficient to do that, and those discussions will be next year, as you get into those elements for both housing and jobs, I think, with regard to UGB expansion. So it's going to be a lot more discussion on that. The numbers that were shown in the prior slide about the deficit, the shortfall, and land needs to accommodate that 6,000 additional people. They are preliminary. They do assume all the pipeline projects move forward before this is adopted, which is about a year and a half from now. And so they will change likely. So we'll come back to you with updates on that table there. But regardless of the UGB question, we still have a discussion about what policies we may want to consider in the interim to help address some of the housing need that we're seeing now in terms of increased demand for the smaller format housing units and where we can provide those within the city, if possible, through changes in regulations. And so tonight, we're just going to highlight some things that the advisory committee landed on in terms of policies we might want to further evaluate as part of the housing production strategy, which can get adopted ahead of the housing needs analysis and UGB question. So we can still move forward on some policy decisions. The focus is really on techniques you can use to support additional housing investment locally, some considerations for updating your code, ways to make it maybe more, lower the barriers for developers to deliver housing at a lower cost potentially, and to optimize your public investment that you've already made to leverage private investment where you'd like it to occur. And these are intended to be more proactive strategies as opposed to kind of waiting for the development community to recommend something to you that they think you should do. We have met with some developers. We've talked with them as part of this process, so we do have some input there to share. Next slide, please. So we've tried to organize these types of policies into a number of categories. Some are focused on zoning and code changes and regulatory code changes. Those are categories A and B. Then we have some financial incentives and things we can do to help guide private investment, where you'd like it to occur in the type of housing you'd like to see locally. That includes categories C, D, and E, which gets into potential for tax exemptions and abatement if you like to see that occur, to leverage certain types of housing investment. And then we can go even more proactive into category F, where, and Canby has already been proactive for some public-private developments in your downtown core, and that would pursue some additional partnerships and opportunities through land public-private development agreements. And there's a number of custom options. So we have a lot to cover. I'll try to go quickly over the ones that the committee has identified so far. So next slide, please. With regard to the housing policy strategies, we can look at new criterias for identifying land that might be suitable for upzoning, and that upzoning typically means you're going to allow a apartment, small apartment or townhome project to occur in a lower density zone. And we tend to focus those on areas that are close to community centers or schools, places that might have good transportation access, that type of thing. So it's probably very limited locations. Maybe along the Highway 99 corridor, we might see some opportunities to upzone or to rezone to mixed use to allow potentially housing over commercial in the future. That could be one way to achieve that policy. Next would be revising the development code to allow duplexes. I think you've already done that to comply with state requirements already. So that one, I think you've pretty much already checked off the box. And then allowing cottage clusters. Cottage clusters are basically a way of putting smaller homes, typically 800 square feet or so, onto one site, and these sites can be small. It can be 1 acre or even smaller, and you can somehow put 4 to 6 clusters of housing on one site, and sometimes they're modular homes if the code allows it, and it can become a kind of a group housing arrangement where they can share some common areas as well. And it's it could be an interim use for a site, but it definitely meets the more kind of affordable housing niche with regard to the market's ability to provide affordable housing without any public subsidy. The other one that was identified was ways to encourage multifamily residential development in downtown. You have a great example next door at the Dahlia Building, I think. There might be some other sites that we can look at to work with private developers to maybe share the price of parking and things like that to encourage that type of development if you'd like more of that to be in downtown. And I mentioned expanding mixed-use zoning. That would primarily be in locations where you have good transportation access, like the 99 corridor. Let's see, designs to promote aging in place. People have talked about that as a way to, again, maybe allow more kind of low-density development that is clustered. So we have one level units that could be in a townhome environment, and that could work well as people age. And so we just want to make sure you have good design standards to allow that. And next slide, please. Regarding removing development barriers, what we found is that we can reduce minimum lot sizes through a technique called lot size averaging. So a developer may, instead of having an 8,000 square foot minimum lot size on a difficult site, they might find a way to deliver a 7, an 8, and a 9 to get that 8,000 square foot average because of some lots might be strange configurations. So that helps increase development on a small site or a difficult site. And then identifying opportunities to streamline planned unit developments. Planned unit developments, you have a number of them in the pipeline now, but they do require a lot of work for the engineering and planning consultants and engineers to kind of come to the city on many occasions through design review process. And I think there's ways where we can just tell them up front, this is what we're looking for. We're looking for maybe a mix of housing. We'd like to see maybe 20% of the units be delivered something other than detached homes and give you the flexibility to show us how you can do that, as opposed to being overly regulatory about the mix you'd like to see, or just let them go back and bring to you kind of a cookie cutter subdivision. Give them a little more guidance there. Lowering off-street parking requirements works in cities where you have a lot of walkable destinations. It works with maybe housing close to stores. That could work next to a grocery store, maybe within a quarter mile. But if you really need good transit to make that work, and I know there's probably just a few locations where that might be appropriate and can be, mostly in downtown or along 99 corridor. So those are just some policy strategies to consider in the near term. And we can go back and evaluate these in more detail as we look at how effective they might actually be for delivering housing. Next slide, please. Some of the financial strategies that we've used, they can include focusing your infrastructure on a few locations. You have limited infrastructure dollars for roads, water, sewer projects to increase capacity. You want to find out where you might get the most bang for your buck with regard to roadway investments, and then or other types of investments, and then focus there and on those locations. We can consider density bonuses for affordable housing. Some communities provide an extra, if you build one affordable unit at a deed restricted 80% of median family income, we will allow you to build another additional housing unit of market housing on that site. It's just a way to encourage private developers to build more affordable housing. The STC fee schedules, you're going to revisit those after you do your transportation system plan. Those are impact fees on new development. And a lot of communities are starting to vary those by home size, as opposed to having the same rate for a single-family home that's 4,000 square feet as 1,000 square feet. We can vary those to make it lower for the 1,000 square foot home, and that's something we recommend in the future. So those are just a few kind of low-hanging items to consider. Next slide, please.
Quick question.
Sure.
Yeah, thank you. So when you were can you go back the slide more? When you were talking about the density bonuses for affordable housing, and you mentioned to do where you can offer, if a developer does a deed restricted property, did you say 80% of median income? Is that the example you used?
That's something we use in certain cities.
Sure.
On the coast, in Tillamook County, they're considering 120% as being affordable.
Right.
So you can define that.
Okay, but when we talk about that, when that's deed restricted, that sticks with the property. So then when that property turns over again, that deed restriction of X% of median income stays with the property, right?
Yes.
And then by doing that, you're saying that you would allow them to do additional market value on the same parcel? Am I understanding that strategy right?
You're right. Additional development can occur. So, yeah, they could, instead of just building, maybe if there's a zone for a duplex, would then allow a triplex or a quadplex.
Interesting.
If two are deed restricted and two are not.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and there is a time limit to that deed restriction.
What's an example of a time limit that you see on those?
10 to 15 years. Sometimes that's tied to a tax abatement incentive as well. So in addition to giving them the bonus incentive, the next slide, I think we're going to talk about tax abatement. And so, yeah, they go hand in glove. It usually takes a few different techniques to allow the private development community to say, okay, I'm going to do this. And it's not just the bonus density, the parking reduction. It's also potentially some limited tax abatement. And that limited tax abatement can apply to vertical housing or can apply to the type of housing, whether it's affordable housing they're providing or whether it's just an apartment building. So you have some flexibility there, depending on what type of tax abatement you'd like to provide, if any. Sometimes we use urban renewal dollars to help pay down the system development charges for developers that are willing to build this affordable housing inventory. So that's one way to give them incentive. So you could create a urban, or expand your urban renewal district for that purpose. And the other strategies are really aimed at, working with nonprofits because they really have the best means to access grants, low-income tax credits, and that type of thing to deliver mixed-income housing. And creating partnerships where the city might have some surplus land or has right of first refusal on some property, or the school district has some surplus property. School district also needs housing for their teachers. And so this would be an opportunity for the school district to work with the city and a nonprofit to deliver some housing. So all these are techniques that we've seen work with fairly little controversy in a lot of communities we work in. It does take effort. You're being proactive, but it's not like you're being the developer of housing. You're not. City of Canby won't be the developer of housing. So next slide, please. There's a number of custom policies. Other things you can do to work with the community. You can conduct additional outreach to property owners. We call it, and down on the coast they call this speed dating between developers and property owners, just to see if they can kind of reach a mutual agreement about maybe there's opportunity to build either an accessory dwelling unit on my property or a short plat and have a couple of additional dwelling units on my property. It might make it more affordable for them as well as they age in place to have some extra income coming in on the property. So that's an outreach exercise, an education exercise. And just updating your housing needs periodically, that's something the city staff can start to do. We're gonna need to do that as part of this process as we look closely at those pipeline projects. Working with developers, we continue to get input on what might be barriers or what might be working in other locations. And all those in combination are kind of, I think, low-cost ways to encourage additional development on land that's already inside the urban growth boundary. Any questions on some of these ideas? There's a lot of things to think about there. You might have some ideas you've seen in other communities that you'd like to try. All these ideas, as we move forward with this housing production strategy, we'll need to evaluate every one of these ideas in terms of how likely they can spur housing investment and what's the cost to the city with each one of these, because some do have costs. Tax abatement might have a cost, but we want to make sure it has a benefit as well.
I don't need an answer to this now. Joe, you may be able to assist, and I'll drop in next week and we can talk about this. But it has to do with us being pushed into even greater deficit in terms of our affordable housing. We have two significant manufactured housing pieces of land. Mm-hmm. And what I'd like to know is what the law is in terms of how much notice a landowner has if they want to move everybody off and do redevelopment, mm-hmm. and how much requirements there are to accommodate these people. Right. I want us to have some sort of plan in place. Mm-hmm. If one of these says tomorrow, this property would be worth a lot more if I built some executive housing on it. Sure. And you're given your 30, 90, whatever day, and we are left with hundreds of people in this city right. who have been depending upon that. Right. So we don't have to answer that there, but I do not want to lose this. Right. Because as in the next 20 years, I suspect we're going to see one, if not both of those, go away. And I would like to have some plan for us to handle that instead of start scrambling from day one when we get a notice.
Yeah, that's a great point. Yeah, that we've been working on housing preservation strategies in other communities where this is occurring. So there's some good best practices in that regard. Thank you. Great. All right. Well, we're making good time. Let's try the next slide. We have a break.
No time for a break.
Take a breath, take a drink of water.
Power through.
Okay.
We got 5 minutes.
Okay. All right. Next slide, please. We're going to talk more about the economic opportunities analysis. So it's great that the city of Canby is considering both housing and jobs at the same time. I don't understand why some communities just do one at a time, because they go hand in hand. And this slide shows generally what land we considered to be kind of potentially employment land, mostly, which is red and pink. The pipeline projects are kind of in that brownish green color. A couple of those pipeline projects have been put on hold indefinitely. So what we've done in this economic impact analysis or economic opportunity analysis, if we've assumed those pipeline projects are not a given. We've counted all that land as buildable in our analysis. Whereas in the housing, we've assumed those projects were going to move forward between adoption and today. So next slide, please. We'll kind of show you what that adds up to. Oh boy, I can't read that. Yeah, you got it closer. So basically what it adds up to is just 18 acres of commercially zoned land spread over 26 lots. So most of that is very kind of small lots under 1 acre in size. So we're very limited on commercial inventory. On the industrial side, we have 165 acres spread over 63 lots. So we do have 64 acres in 3 lots, and that, some of those are the big ones about, the Pioneer Industrial Park. And then we have 4 lots with at least 5 acres. So you do have some industrial land supply. If somebody came tomorrow and they needed a 5-acre lot, you might be able to find them one. But if they wanted a 10-acre lot, I don't think you could find them a 10-acre lot because it's tied up. So, your employment land supply isn't what it was 15 years ago. It's mostly spoken for. That being said, next slide, please. What we've tried to do in this exercise, and this is where we'd really like your feedback tonight, is we've looked at 3 different growth scenarios. Because with employment, unlike housing, we're required to use PSU's numbers for population. With employment, we have some flexibility. We can use a little more of a local vision in terms of what you want Canby to look like in 20 years. We have 3 scenarios. We have what we call a safe harbor scenario, which is the low growth. In this scenario, we're assuming that your growth rates will basically be a little bit lower than what you've had over the last 10 years. The industrial job growth will be about 50% less than what you've had over the last 10 years. And all your other jobs will probably follow because a lot of industrial jobs tend to be supply chains or they drive supply chains in the local area. And so, that low growth scenario is one that DLCD would likely not refute. The staff at least, and LCDC probably wouldn't appeal it if you went with that low growth scenario, because we consider that to be a safe harbor assumption. The medium growth scenario is more consistent with what has actually happened here over the last 11 years. So it assumes you really don't have much of a constrained land supply for industrial jobs, really. We're going to increase the other job sectors basically in line with what the Oregon Employment Department thinks will occur for all the job sectors in the Tri-County region, for industrial, office, retail, government. Those sectors will likely grow according to what those average forecasts are projected to be over 10 years. We think that's very reasonable for Canby. It actually equates to about what you've been growing at anyway. So I think that's defensible. The high growth scenario is like the medium growth scenario, but then also assumes we're going to get at least 1 to 3 additional large employers that are each going to require about a 10-acre site. And so it's a little more aspirational. It gets into special siting requirements for those prime industrial users. And it also assumes that maybe our service job growth is higher than what it would be otherwise, because maybe we have this big regional recreation facility that becomes a tourism draw and can attract events, state tournaments, whether it be basketball, or softball or baseball or soccer, football. I've worked on a number of these large regional facilities, and they can have truly statewide significance in terms of economic impacts. So that would require more land as well. So those are the 3 scenarios. The next slide, please, will show you kind of what they require in terms of land. And I'm so sorry for these fonts. But basically, the low growth scenario would result in about an 85-acre shortfall of land in Canby. So not a significant shortfall. A lot of that, most of that would be for industrial zones. The medium growth scenario results in about a 444 acre shortfall of gross buildable land. And the high growth is about 490 acres of additional land needed. Now, the commercial shortfall really isn't much at all. It's about 6 acres in the medium scenario. And that might be for like a neighborhood center. As you add more neighborhoods, you might need additional grocery store in the future. That's about it. You might need a hotel as well to plan for in Canby and things like that, but not a lot of commercial. But the industrial need is to where we feel the pinch. And so I know that we really will need to determine whether you want to kind of evaluate this medium or high growth scenario. The advisory committee for our EOA did recommend the medium scenario. They were leaning towards the high growth scenario, but they realized it would be tougher to defend that than a medium. And so let's not waste time and money defending a scenario that we may not get approved. So they were leaning in that direction. Other cities where I've worked, including Wilsonville, have kind of gone with the low growth scenario for different reasons. So it's not unreasonable to consider it. But then again, they had a lot of industrial land to begin with, so they didn't necessarily need to think about expanding their UGB. So they're in a completely different situation. So that's something we'll talk about tonight. Next slide, please. Some of the policy decisions. So as you think about those low, medium, and high growth scenarios, we worked on your 2013 economic vision, and it had a number of aspirational focus areas that our committee basically edited. They might have added one, but they basically thought they were all relevant today. A lot of it focused, and the community input was similar, on maintaining quality of life for local residents. We don't want to jeopardize neighborhoods and sacrifice them for job growth necessarily. Focus on quality jobs. Quality jobs are basically jobs that pay above average wage rates. And not every business provides that, but a lot of industrial businesses do. And so that's one reason why to consider some additional business park expansion. Improving your tax base. Not every business results in a lot of assessed value. But, assessed value doesn't always mean more money to the city under Oregon Measure 5 and 50. What it might mean is, though, you can press tax rates for residents, though. If you have more assessed value, you can lower your tax rates for the people that live here over time. Maintaining an active downtown was another aspiration, and you've begun down that path, and it's great. Canby today versus 20 years ago, downtown's looking really nice, and it seems to be coming along nicely. So anything that can enhance that is preferred. Additional focus on Highway 99, design, corridor treatments, gateway treatments, landscaping, maybe mixed-use development, as I mentioned, in the housing alternative could improve that over time. More housing, diverse housing, workforce housing, so that teachers and law enforcement professionals and others, health workers, can afford to live here. Because right now, you basically have to be a high-income, dual-income household where your kids might be in high school, then you can afford to move here. So it's hurting your K through 12 population levels by not having diverse housing options, I think. Neighborhood safety and livability with pedestrian connections to the jobs and to downtown. Those are underscored as well. So all these are relevant. I think we can continue to design objectives around these aspirational goals. So we have a lot to start with. I don't think there's any argument there. Next slide, please. You can read this vision statement. Right now you have a mission statement and a vision statement. They're both a little bit redundant, so we've tried to combine them into one statement. But basically, it's continuing to enhance Canby as a unique place, not necessarily preserving your small town, but it's preserving your unique sense of community. I don't know what a small town really is by definition. With a population over 10,000, you're no longer a small city from DLCD standards. So you're growing into a medium-sized city. Medium-sized cities have, they have outpatient health centers, they have professional office and medical office space areas, lots of recreation. They have visitation facilities. They have things for employees to do as in terms of amenities and all that. So you're definitely going down, you're growing into that. And so this vision statement is intended to enhance that, keep downtown as inviting and safe, continue to be a great location for businesses. One of the feedback we've been getting from businesses, Canby's very easy to work with from a permitting point of view. Staff and all that knows kind of what they're doing, helpful, and it's not always the case where we work. So continue to enhance that. Your employment centers and your range of sites is another attribute that Canby has that a lot of locations don't have that we work in, and that was cited as a real feature for growing a business here in Canby. But businesses also recognize that you don't have a lot of vacant flex space if they are growing. So we need to provide opportunities for existing small businesses to grow here. And proactively plan to invest wisely in your infrastructure and services so the community can manage growth in a sustainable manner. You've tried to do this. You've always tried to integrate transportation and land use, but it's difficult. And so we want to make sure when you do update your utility rates, your transportation utility fee, your impact fees, businesses that really impact the system, like warehousing distribution, pay more than businesses that don't impact it as much. And so we'll pay a lot of attention to that in the future as an objective. So those are all part of the vision statement. You're welcome to wordsmith this and feed comments to Don or Jamie or Ryan, but I think we'll get a nice vision out of this. Next slide, please. Oh yeah, so this is one of the last slides. These are some of the objectives that the advisory committee recommended that we begin to focus on. Enhancing Canby's positive business environment. We talked about maybe streamlined permitting and things like that as ways to do that. Planning for the industrial expansion areas east and north of Milano Road. That's been on the books for a while. And it continues maybe over the next couple of years, you'll really begin to figure out whether you can even get 400 acres out there. I don't know if you can, but we certainly want to look at the transportation impacts, truck routes, make sure that they're able to handle future trips, and make sure that the funding's in place to pay for those truck routes. Retaining and attracting existing businesses that provide high levels of employment per acre with incentives for targeted job creation. Those will be objectives that we include. We can, if we did have an urban renewal district in the Pioneer Industrial Area, we can have some new ways to incentivize certain businesses using urban renewal funds. That's an option that you could consider in the future. Expanding health services locally, expanding workforce training and development options for existing residents and high school students as well. And lodging options. This was on there in 2013 and continues to be one of the objectives. Funding roads and infrastructure with innovative techniques. I talked a little bit about that. Supporting arts and visitation. There's now demand for both agritourism and bicycle tourism. Canby's pretty well positioned for that. It benefits retailers on weekends in particular. So that's something that we can work into the mix. And continuing to attract downtown revitalization and updating your, and really having good design standards and guidelines to begin with. So if a new development does come forward and maybe it does displace an existing development, the new development looks a lot better than the old development. That's basically what you want, especially when you're trying to attract middle housing. There are ways to do that as well. And I've seen some bad examples, and I've seen some good examples. So we definitely want to focus on the good. So these are all the objectives that have been carried, and we're welcome to hear about anything you'd like to see changed or enhanced or underscored as we work with staff to try to bring you back an economic opportunity analysis with some draft objectives for you to actually chew on.
Councilor Clark, you have a comment?
And I actually just questions that I'd like to put on the record. We need to move into our next meeting, so if you can capture these and get back. Secondly, terrific work by the committee. They have done some heavy lifting on this stuff. But two things. First of all, on the requirement that we have to go out and get additional employment lands, that we are tasked with meeting a certain level. Is that at all tied to the demographics of our population? Let's just say that over the next 20 years, the only people that move to Canby are retired. They don't want jobs. Is that at all figured into the matrix? Don't have to answer it now, just.
Yeah.
And then the second thing about Lynn Wallace, the economist with the State Employment Department in Clackamas County, her words that one of the problems that Canby has is that every day 8,000 people leave Canby to go to jobs that pay enough for them to live here, and 4,000 people come here to work in service jobs that don't pay enough to live here, and they have to commute up to 30 miles. And it seems to me that a rational employment housing policy acknowledges, if not tries to address that. Thanks,
Great.
Mayor.
That could become an objective, and it kind of is, it is baked in to those objectives, but I appreciate that.
Yes, Michael.
I don't want everyone to discount the high growth scenario, mainly because, well, I'm looking at the support arts and visitation. Canby has done this. I have done this. It's not just, ask Burgerville what it's like, not only when Allegro comes, but Willamette Dance from south, or Grand Finale Dance from across the river to the north. Or when we had competitions, they came from literally all over the state and from some nearby adjacent states. And they spent a lot of money when they were here. One of the things with that is, though, it's, we were partly dependent on the school district to support that attraction, and it wasn't exclusively, a city or a private, and so our fortunes and the school district's fortunes in that endeavor were tied together. But it's happened, and we've done it before, and so, there you have it.
No, I appreciate that, Commissioner Hutchinson. We know the events that bring people into town, and we've seen a dramatic increase in that. So how do we leverage that? And then you look at the industrial park, and that's relatively from, in some cases 24 hours, but we'll say from 7 to 5 is a captive audience that at least lunchtime, if they're not eating there at their facility, they're coming into town, or if they're going to the grocery store or whatever. So I was kind of looking at that high growth one as well, kind of going, how do we meet that from an aspirational standpoint, and to meet those land use goals? That's a huge amount of land. It is. It's not too different than what we did when we did the first urban renewal district. So what does that conversation look like, in terms of how do you get there to get that? And I'd be curious, to hear from, not tonight, but maybe later on, our economic development team's recommendation on both of those, the medium and high growth, and what would that look like, and how do we get there before we even begin to kind of bat that around. So, yeah, it's an interesting piece. So we are out of time. I wish we had another half hour to go. I mean, we kind of commit to 7 o'clock, but I think there's a lot to work on and work with. So from the consultant perspective, next steps, what you need us to answer these discussion and recommendation points on both the housing and the economic analysis so far, correct?
Let us know if we're on the right track. That's the key. And then if you do want us to continue to pursue this medium scenario preference of the committee, that's good to know as well. Or if you'd like us to kind of regroup, not that we'd achieve it, but at least we'd evaluate it. Yeah.
Sure. Okay. Councilor President Hensley?
I think that we need to noodle all that we consumed tonight.
Yes.
And work on these things and maybe have a short, brief work session that is truly a joint session, because we don't have a quorum from the planning commission. And we can work on this list and get back to them. I mean, at a very near future date, we could have prior to the council meeting, have a true joint session that we can discuss this page that's before us right now.
Great.
That's my thought.
Okay. Other thoughts, comments right now? Councilor Spoon?
This is a lot of information. It's great. Thank you so much. I appreciate the work you all did and that our committees did, our citizen involvement. I would also, so I think that I could use some more information before I really determine for myself if I feel like medium or high. I don't think I have enough data to come to a conclusion there for myself. I assume there's more data that you have beyond this that we can review, and then I would also be interested in staff's thoughts on which scenario fits what we're working with as well. I think a recommendation from staff on that would be really helpful.
Okay. Yes.
To answer your question, I didn't find it in there, so if this slide sheet or this slide presentation could be emailed to us while
Yes,
we're noodling all
absolutely.
this, that would be helpful.
Absolutely.
Yeah, because I think the slides that were on there that broke down all the different, like going back to the housing one, all the different categories and whatnot, where there's a lot of policy things in there.
Right.
I think not only the planning commission, but also the council needed to decide, okay, which of those do we want to look at and pursue, and which makes sense, and then which ones we would never look at, right? And same thing here on the economic development side of things, like can you go to the previous slide? Yeah, these objectives here, what within each of those, how do we flush those out a little bit better to make, so that we can make some policy decision or fine tune those objectives a little bit more. So I think we've got some lifting to do. I think you guys have all been on the right track. I think our committees have been doing a great job getting us to this point with both of the consultant groups. So I think continuing to engage that angle, if that's still something that needs to be done, I would say continue to do that while we figure out in the coming weeks and months how we flesh these things out on both groups. Councilor Parker?
Well, I've lately complimented planning on how they've come to us with what I call the optometrist thing. Does this look better, or does this look better? And a couple times that you've walked us through some pretty complex policy issues, and you might want to consider that as a way of us trying to cover a lot of ground. Do you even want to consider this, or do you want to consider that? Because the more precise we can be with you, the more efficient you can be in terms of what you work on. But I'm really impressed with what I've seen so far tonight.
Yeah, just looking at this list, I'm just grabbing on to number 4 as you were talking, Councilor Parker, just like, so provide incentives for targeted job creation and major private investment. So, yeah, this or that, like, what are those incentives, because we know that there's a full toolbox out there that we can use. So what are those tools, and which one do we want to use? Do we want the 1/4-inch wrench, or do we want the 3/4-inch wrench, right? Like, so what within those do we want to use, or no incentives at all? Like, I mean, that's a piece to that as well, so, and those may be things that we've got to go through and do and flesh out and ask those questions on, like, what does that mean? What else plays into those sub-objectives to help us get there?
Sure.
So, okay. Any other thoughts, comments for staff and the facilitator or the consultants? Okay. Well, gentlemen, thank you very much for the report and the work so far. Jamie and Ryan, all you guys as well. It's been a huge addition, and it's getting us in the right direction. I mean, one of the things we have continued to talk about is the comp plan and the transportation plan. Those are big pieces coming up, and we've got to get these things. I don't know if we can get them right, but we got to get them pretty close to right to, launch into that process. So, council ideas moving forward. I will reach out to you all about that, about how to keep this, since we've got it ginned up and going, how do we keep it going? And I'll work with Scott and Don about, the next couple of agendas so that we can keep this being talked about. And then Don, I'm sure we'll work with Jason and the planning commission on their end of it as well. So maybe we do separate work before we come back together again as an option. So, yes, Mr. City Administrator.
One very quick comment. Thank you, Mayor. Just a very quick comment before we close. I just want to acknowledge all of the excellent work and leadership of Don and the planning department. And Jamie is also very involved in a lot of this. But we have a lot going on right now in our city, and both in the current planning efforts and then all of this long-range planning work that seems to kind of have all stacked up and been ready to go. And here we are just in the midst of all this, working towards our comp plan and all of these things. But it's really a heavy lift. And so Don and Ryan and everybody on the planning team and all the others, I just wanted to acknowledge the really great work of staff. This is a lot of work to keep moving forward all at one time and really doing a fine job with that. So thank you to staff.
Thanks, Scott. I appreciate that. So some logistics here for this evening before we move on. Are we transitioning for the council to go back up on the dais for this evening? And so Maya, and what do we need to do to get us there?
Yes, thank you. I need help moving the table skirts off, and then we can move the tables and everything else.
Okay. Planning Commission, thank you very much.
That hang tight so they don't come in.
Good evening, Canby. If you, welcome to the regular city council meeting for, October 19th. Where'd the month go already? If you please stand for a moment of silence and then the Pledge of Allegiance. Can I just take a moment as your moment of silence just to be thoughtful of and think of the families and the first responders and their battling the fire across the river there in Clark County and the families that are being displaced. Just keep them in your thoughts. All right, thank you. I pledge
Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. Thank you all very much for your patience this evening. We had an evening work session. We were getting an update on our, we're in the middle of a housing needs and economic opportunity assessment. And so we were reviewing that whole process and where that's at this evening. And so obviously a very heady conversation, and we ran over. So I appreciate everybody's flexibility this evening. So we've got a pretty good agenda for you this evening, and we're going to get that started with our city administrator, Mr. Archer, with some staff introductions.
Thank you, Mayor. Oops. There we go. Yes, Mayor and Council, we have actually, there's listed on the agenda are 3, but actually just doing 2 of those tonight, and actually neither of those new staff members could be here, so we're going to introduce them anyway, just so you know a couple of new names and what positions we've just recently filled. And then at our next meeting, we're actually going to have a couple of other staff introductions. So first I want to introduce a new custodian for the city, Tony Zuniga. Tony started with us about a month ago. I wanted to also tell you, Council, that this is one of the new positions that you and the Budget Committee supported putting in our budget. We phased out our contracted custodial work over the last year plus. We hired our first new custodian last year, and then this second position kind of rounds out our needs. So Tony has joined us recently and is on board. So we basically have 2 custodial positions providing support to all of our city facilities. And then a new finance member, Jillian Self. And Jillian also just started here in the last few weeks. Jillian is a finance technician. This also was another of the new positions that you supported in the budget. And it's provides support to our finance department, as well as kind of provides some customer service interface needs that we were in need of being met. So you'll see Jillian a lot at our front counter reception area upstairs here. Jillian is a local Canby resident. She enlisted in the Army at age 18, served for a couple of years as a medic. Her and her husband were stationed in Alaska together and also spent some time later living in Hawaii, came back to the mainland. Jillian continued to work in the healthcare industry after her time as a medic in the military. And then eventually they landed here in Canby. She has 2 daughters, and her hobbies mostly center around family time, doing lots of different activities. So Jillian will be the friendly face that you'll see upstairs. And then again, we'll have a couple of additional introductions at our next meeting for you.
Great. Thank you, Scott. Next on the agenda is opportunity for citizen input and community announcements. This is an opportunity for the audience members to address the council on items not on the agenda for the evening. If you are attending in person, please fill out a yellow card. Those are located on the podium in the back, and make sure that comes into Maya, our Assistant City Recorder, and she'll make sure I get them and that you get your time. As you approach, please make sure to speak into the microphone, and you have 3 minutes to speak on your announcement or your issue for the council. Staff and City Council will make every effort to respond to the questions raised during citizen input before the meeting ends, or as quickly as possible thereafter. If you would like to speak virtually, please email the Deputy City Recorder, so that's Maya, by 4:30 on the day of our city council meetings, with your name, the topic you'd like to speak on, and then your contact information. So we did have, before I get into the yellow cards that I have here, Maya, do we have anyone on Zoom for this evening on this matter, on community announcements?
No, we do not.
Okay. I did get one email did come in for this evening from Cheryl Paschal, who asked that her email be read, and it's regarding the topic of the dog park. And her comment is, a dog park in a high traffic area with sirens nearby does not seem like a good idea. Throw in the price tag of $900,000, and it's not something many citizens of Canby will support. I'm also concerned about the Honda pits as an alternate location with the railroad tracks, police station, and heavy truck traffic in the area. It too has drawbacks. The area is not easily accessed by vehicles, and one possible access, Baker Drive, being a slide-prone area. Any increase in traffic endangers the stability of the bank above the Molalla River, the city water wells, and the homes on Baker Drive, which includes my home. The Molalla River State Park is a location that seems ideal. Evaluation of this option should be done before moving forward with the territorial road site. Again, thank you, Cheryl Paschal. Moving into the cards. First up is Gail Gardner, wants to address the council about the dog park. If you want to come up here, Gail. Good evening.
Okay. I have concerns about the territorial and redwood location for the dog park. I don't care about the money or the park or anything else, but that location. I'm aware the dog park was presented some 10 years ago for that location. I'm aware that that location 10 years ago was a completely different landscape. I've lived there for 15 years. It's not as suitable for a dog park now as it was then. A lot has changed. One apartment complex, another proposed, were not there. Housing developments of over 100 houses were not there. Hundreds of cars from those houses, 2 per home or more, were not there. A fire station was not there. Territorial becoming the new 99 was not happening then. Now we have increased traffic, big trucks, souped up cars, motorcycles. You wouldn't believe the noise starting at 4 a.m. 10 years later, this block, Redwood, Territorial, Pine, has too much traffic, too much noise, too much pollution, too much congestion, too much concrete, too many buildings. I feel like I'm living in downtown Manhattan. When I moved here, I felt I was in a nice, idyllic rural community. 10 years later, too many trees have been removed. Too many animals have lost their habitat. Too much natural beauty is now gone. We are at maximum level at Territorial between Pine and Redwood. We already have an informal dog park right there. The proposed additional park would not add to, but would greatly lessen the quality of life for the citizens, your constituents, who live on that side of town. The council meeting records state that hundreds of people have been waiting for years for the dog park. 500 signatures were in favor. Where are they? Do they live on Territorial and Redwood? Why aren't they here to tell us about their financial commitment and volunteer service commitment? I've seen no evidence of them at the meetings. Where are they? Do they live on this part of town? What I have seen are 2 pros at the open house, 50 cons, 14 pages of concerns, 250 plus signatures. A large number of your constituents have seriously voiced legitimate and numerous concerns in a dignified, polite manner. You have not heard us screaming and yelling at you. We have heard no response from the council. I feel like we're being ignored. Is this just a pointless discussion? Thank you so much.
Thank you, Gail. Appreciate that. Mary, is it Doak? Hi, Mary. And you also want to address us about the dog park.
Mayor Hudson, council members, thank you for letting me come talk to you. I'm the one who sent you the email inviting you to the dog birthday party at the unofficial dog park. And I'm sorry that none of you were there. It was a great time. We had a wonderful time. It was quite funny. And Council Parker, I want to especially thank you for taking the time to respond. I really appreciate that. It meant a lot to me. So I guess I'm here more to ask questions. It seems like, as the previous speaker said, we have given you so many reasons. So many people have come before you saying this just is not the place for a fenced-in dog park. Not that we don't believe in fenced-in dog parks. I mean, yeah, none of us has said we don't want that, but it is the location. And I have to say the cost of the dog park also, that's a lot of money to spend without, I don't know. I think there needs to be more study done. And you've listened to all the testimony and all the reasons why we say this isn't a good idea. But people keep asking me, well, why are the council members who are in favor of it? Why? And I can't answer that because I haven't heard from the council members who are in favor of putting a fenced dog park on Territorial Road. So I want to ask if each one of you would at least speak to that and why you are so adamant on putting a fenced dog park on Territorial when so many of us have given you 1,000 reasons why it's a bad place. The other thing, and I do want an answer, I do want to hear from each one of you. I think it's very important for us to know what you're thinking. You certainly know what we're thinking. The other thing, and I tried to do my homework on this, and I'm afraid I kind of missed the spot, and I was talking to somebody about it, and I'm going to have to go back and search. But how many dogs are there in Canby? Has anybody done a review? And of those dogs, how many owners would take their dog to a dog park? And gathering signatures and talking to people just casually, I bring up the subject of the dog park, and everybody's in favor of dog park, but almost everybody I've talked to said, no, I don't think I would use it. And they all have different reasons, and they're all valid reasons. So I think we need to look at how many dogs would be using that park before we start sinking in $900,000. Thank you. Okay.
Thank you very much. Appreciate that, Mary. Next, I have Ken Buckles to address the council on Vietnam vets.
You want me to do this now or do that after you guys do this?
Oh, I'm sorry. Thank you. We'll come back to you, Ken. I'm glad these guys are paying attention this evening. We'll come back to you when it's later in the agenda. How's that? Okay.
Thanks, Ken.
And then, so my last yellow card for now is Lana Bollinger about the trees in the dog park. Hi, Lana.
Hi, Lon.
Before I start, I want to ask how many of you live in North Canby? One person. 2 people. Okay, I know, Banks, I don't know where he lives.
So-
And how many, what was my other question about that? How many of you have dogs? Okay, well, of course, we're in Oregon. Okay. Well, you know, I'm the environmental person that I've talked to you before about the environment and preserving the trees in Canby. And I had some amount of sympathy from you folks, but not any concrete behavior. So I've written this so I can try to keep myself in my 3-minute window here. And it involves the dog park, and it also involves those trees that are right next to that are part of the deal that you're talking about. So, where do I start? I've made a lot of assumptions about you folks because I don't really have time to question you individually. And some of these assumptions are that you understand the democratic process, that you know that you are supposed to represent the citizens of Canby, the current citizens of Canby, not the citizens of Canby in 2009, that you are not representing special interests, developers, business owners, the people who own commercial property, nor are you representing your own pet projects. You're representing the citizens of Canby. That would be me. I'm your generic citizen. I am your boss, okay? And that when you listen to the citizens, that you will respond appropriately, that you just will not sit like the Sphinx and not respond. We're talking to you. You are not talking back. And that when you come in here to do this job, that you leave your ego and your special interests at the door, like any other job that you have. Okay, you have pages and pages, this little thing, which we all got copies of specific complaints, so I'm not going to go over those. But the thing is, in reading those, on page 15, you state that you are moving on with your project. You don't say, well, these people are concerned, I'm going to stop for a minute and think this over. You say you're moving on. There's some kind of conflicting craziness going on here. You have not addressed the specific concerns of the citizens. This last lady up here asked you to comment. Nobody said a word. Nobody. You're deaf and indifferent on this subject. It's kind of disturbing. Okay, if you have the funding for this park, you have the money, why don't you use that money to handle your deferred maintenance, the things that you have not done on that list? We had an ice storm, we had a windstorm, we had a big fire, we had a long hot summer. The trees in this town are damaged and traumatized, and they need attention, okay? This is not 2009, this is not 2013. Things have changed, as that other lady said earlier. We have an increased population and the baggage that goes with it, and you know what that is. The Three Sisters property deal stated a possible park. It did not say a dog park, and it did not say a fence. There are issues with this location. The Willamette Wayside, you are trying to neutralize. The Willow Creek Environment Protection. That you have, okay, do you want me to fill out another card so I can finish my tree thing? I'll be done in about 2 seconds.
2 seconds.
Okay. Willow Creek Protection, you're on a floodplain. You have no utilities there, so you're gonna go cut down the trees right next to that property. There's something very wrong with that. You can't negotiate with the county to put utilities on their side. Do you know that every time you cut down a tree, it releases CO2?
Thank you.
Do you know that when you cut into it, it feels it? Do you know why it feels it?
Thank you,
Because it knows it. You are doing the wrong thing here.
Thank you, Lana. Sorry, I
I
gotta
have
keep.
another page. Okay.
Well,
you
I have a hunch we'll see you next
I feel
time.
like screaming at you sometimes. You were talking about diddling around with parklets and street dances. You're on a burning boat and you are cutting up the lifeboats and throwing them in the fire.
Thank you, Lana.
You're welcome. Thank you. I'll see you next week.
Okay.
Okay.
All right.
Bring a friend, you can take her 3 minutes.
Okay.
So I will backtrack here for a second to address both, Mary and Lana's comments. So generally, during this time, it is a matter of taking in the input from the community on issues and then, taking it back and having a conversation, either myself with staff or if it's something that we can answer here. So to your questions, yes, there's been a ton of dialogue on this dog park project here over the last couple of months to a year. We're almost at a year since we asked staff to kind of move forward with these things. So, and generally, the public comment section is not a back and forth time between counselors and those there at the podium, because that could go on for a period of time. So I do take in your information and your questions. And later in the meeting, we have mayor comments and then city council liaison reports and their comments. Council's more than welcome if they want to address it at that time, they most certainly can. I can address it because, well, I'm the mayor and that's one of the few things I guess I can do. To Mary's point, we are listening. It may not seem like we're listening when we're just sitting here, I think as Lana called, as Sphinx, not reacting and whatnot. We are taking it in. Most of us were at the community meeting for the dog park conversation that we had. We've got the reports from that, and I would safe to say that all of us have read all of it or pretty darn close to that. Again, I'll let the counselors address that piece if they wish tonight or not. I don't know how many dogs are in Canby, and I don't know how many will use it. I know there's a large group of people at the time that we started having this conversation 10 years ago, 5 years ago, that there is a large contingency of people that want to see a dog park. Is it this one? I don't know. It is a conversation piece that is occurring. So to you, Lana, as well, we are aware of that. My understanding is that should the dog park move forward and continue and be built there, that we will have to take out 3 trees there. You're correct.
How many?
3 is my understanding.
There's 100 of them.
Well, the area that the dog park is being constructed in would only eliminate 3 trees, is my understanding. And that would be for most of it for the parking lot area. So, I do appreciate the development aspect of Canby and its growth has been a challenge, absolutely. When we look at farmland, we look at the neighborhoods and whatnot that have had trees cut down and get replaced with much younger trees that take a longer time to create that shade canopy that we come to enjoy. So, and I appreciate Ilana coming. You've been an ardent attender of the parks meetings and our city council meetings, and so I appreciate that. And any of you, please continue to keep coming. So I'll leave the other comments till later in the evening here when we move on. But thank you all for your comments on the issue. We're going to move into an Eagle Scout presentation this evening. So I was looking forward to picking on all the Eagle Scouts, but I think we just get one to share their Eagle project. So thank you for being here.
This side.
Right where you're at,
Right where you're at.
wherever you want to do it is perfect.
All right. Alrighty. Good evening. My name is Jack Bell. I am a member of the Boy Scout Troop of 882, and I'm currently a senior in the at Canby High School. I've recently finished my Eagle Scout project, and I've come to present my finished project. This is my father, Dan Bell. He is a Scoutmaster of Troop 882. Would you like to say a few words?
Absolutely. So,
your camera.
When you get to the sixth rank in the BSA, that's your life rank where Jack is right now. One of the things you need to do in order to move on to Eagle is you need to do an Eagle project. Probably a lot of you heard about that. It's a project that the Scout has to, they come up with it themselves. They have to take leadership. They have to plan. They have to guide the entire thing. It's not something that they're supposed to just do the whole thing and then go, look what I did. So there was a lot of planning. You have to get it approved. There's a lot of back and forth. We've had multiple people working on this. The total, we built one for the city and one for our sponsor organization, which is the Canby Rod and Gun Club's Educational Foundation. The total time it took to build both of them is a rough estimate of 77 hours. So I think that's a kind estimate, actually. A lot of back and forth and whatnot. And actually, some of the scouts here who came to support us were also part of the builds. And over, it took about 6 weeks or something. Painting takes a long time. Yeah. But anyway, Jack came up with this idea himself and, like I said, took leadership on it.
All right.
So for my project, I had made a flag drop box for the city and my sponsor location.
Wow. Fantastic.
Thank you.
Nice.
As of right now, to my current knowledge, you would need to travel out of Canby to drop off a flag to be retired with honor and respect. And now you can come here to drop it off at any time, and our scout troop will monitor the box and retire them when needed, for example.
Right. Actually, this is when we went to Canby Builder Supply to buy supplies, and we told them what they were doing. Of course, the guy immediately hands me a flag, so I'd like it to be the first flag that goes in. And there's a, for those you can't see, there's a door on the side. The troop will come by as needed to empty it out. And there's also a copy of the U.S. flag code on a plaque on the top here. And what the troop does, that we've retired, I don't even know how many flags we retired, quite a few, with honor and respect. And we do them at campouts and at the gun club.
The materials for these boxes came from companies here in Canby, like Canby Builder Supply, Canby Graphics, and Canby Trophy and Awards. I would like to thank you all for the donation of the materials to build the box for the city. It has been a pleasure working with the city, especially Mr. Nelzine and Mr. Breeze, and I hope this box will serve the city for years to come and be appreciated as such. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
If it's all right with you, I'd love to have the council come down front here and get a picture with both of you or one of you, and yeah.
Jen, where's it gonna be located?
In the lobby.
In the lobby, but we need to figure out a spot because.
Right, we didn't have an exact spot, but yes, somewhere out there. It's pretty solid, but only weighs probably like 35 pounds or so empty, so easily movable. No, you do not get to keep the dollar. So, you want to come on, or you want us to bring it over?
Sure. Turn it around here.
Absolutely.
Dan?
Yes, sir? What was that?
Is there mom here as well?
Yes.
Mom, come on in.
Come be in the picture, Cecilia.
Where are all of you?
Of course it'd be.
Sure.
Go back? Yeah. Congratulations, sir. Yeah.
Nicely done.
Who are you? Very cool.
I think one thing. About 1,000 more.
Awesome.
Didn't agree to that.
Yeah, great job. Thank you.
Yep.
So, Jack, I know that a labor of love to get to this point and get it done, and I think it's a great idea. Were you also involved in the one that's outside the Legion Hall as well? No? Okay. But this one's great, and I'm glad that we're going to be able to put it here in City Hall. And so I know we've got a couple of the other scouts that are here, and I know we have another Eagle Scout that is working on a project as well that he's partnered with the city on. And so really proud of what you two young men have accomplished and are working towards. So thank you for your hard work and doing these projects. These are these small things that carry a big impact in our community. And Council President Hensley and I were at the A-frame on Monday night, meeting with a bunch of the Boy Scouts and working on their community badge and things like that. And so you guys are doing tremendous work in the community and being engaged and involved. And I just want you to know it doesn't go unnoticed, and do appreciate all that you are doing as scouts in our community. So thank you very, very much. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Next on our agenda this evening is the consent agenda.
Mr. Mayor, I move to approve the consent agenda that includes the minutes of the August 17th, 2022 regular city council meeting.
I'll second.
Motion's been made by Council President Hensley and seconded by Councilor Varwick to approve the consent agenda, which includes the minutes of the August 17th, 2022 regular city council. All those in favor?
Aye.
Anyone opposed? That carries 5-0. Moving into resolutions and ordinances this evening. First one up is resolution number 1377, a resolution expressing gratitude to veterans of the Vietnam War and apologizing for the negative ways they were treated upon their return home. Now, before we get into it, I will turn it over to Mr. Buckles.
And there's his card.
There's his card. It says he's in there.
Thank you. This is historic. Got the idea to apologize to our Vietnam veterans from the country of New Zealand, which had this is my wife, Melinda. Sorry, honey, I'm just so excited. For how they were treated. They did it in 2008, and I've thought of this idea for years. And anyway, they're going to do an apology proclamation and be the first city in the United States to do it, Canby, Oregon.
Yeah, I'm so excited.
And some updates. Hermiston is following your lead next week. There's several mayors in many cities that are following this lead. So you just had that thing on the development. You better go for the high-end one, because Canby's going to get well-known as we go across the country starting next week. I just wanted to share one thing, or two things really. We've taken the Hummer to 3 different car shows, and all the Vietnam vets who come, because a lot of them own those classic cars, either break down or cry or get tears in their eyes, and then we start hearing these testimonies. It's just unbelievable the impact it's had on Vietnam vets in Oregon and Canby. Next week, I've written Remembrance Volume 3, which is all Vietnam vets, and I've invited them to a luncheon at Backstop, which Ken is sponsoring next Wednesday at lunch. And I'm excited. There's a bunch of Cambyites in there, including famous Wayne Scott of Canby. He told me no, he would never talk about it for years and years and years, and he finally agreed to open up, and that's historic, and it's been very healing. But the one last thing, because I could tell you the stuff that's going on across the country, it's really exciting, but one that's really exciting is Veterans Day Parade in Washington, D.C. Is going to have the largest contingent of Native American veterans from tribes from all over the United States. 3 different tribes have invited us to have the Hummer in the parade, the Blackfeet, the Muskogee, and the Seminole of Oklahoma. And they want to do a big ceremony at the beginning of the parade and tie an eagle feather on the Hummer. Oh, wow. So thank you so much, Canby. Oh, and I want to say in August, Sean approached, I've met him before but didn't know him. He approached us at Backstop and said, I want to sponsor the fuel. And I'm not in a position to do that yet, but I will be. And he is sponsoring the fuel for the whole trip also, so we're very, very grateful for that. And my wife is going to sing, everywhere we go, my wife's going to sing at the end, "Wind Beneath My Wings" to all the Vietnam vets. And so lots of healing and recognition, and it's all started here in Canby.
So, Ken, when do you depart?
28th, it's Friday morning at 9. We're gonna meet at the helicopter memorial, and Chief Davis and the chief of the police have offered to escort us out of beautiful downtown Canby, and we go to Weston for a big thing there. And we'll be. You can follow us on Facebook, honoring Vietnam veterans across America. We're gonna film, and Tyler Frankie over here has been a tremendous help. Amazing everything he's contributing to this town also, so he's helping us also with. So anyway.
Well, it's, I'm glad that we're here to do a resolution on this evening, and so I'm very excited about it.
Mr. Mayor?
Yes, sir.
If I may.
You may.
I move to approve Resolution 1377, a resolution expressing gratitude to the veterans of the Vietnam War and apologizing for the negative ways that they were treated upon their return home.
Second.
So the motion has been made by Councilor Varwig and seconded by Council President Hensley to approve resolution number 1377, a resolution expressing gratitude to veterans of the Vietnam War and apologizing for the negative ways that they were treated upon their return home. Any comments or discussion?
Absolutely.
Councilor Spoon?
You two are so incredible. You do so much for so many people in this community. I just want to thank you for your continued commitment to veterans. Telling their stories is so powerful, and you've given all of the people that read your books an opportunity to connect with those heroes. And so I'm grateful for that. I'm grateful for you doing this work and starting a movement. It sounds like I know that was the dream, and sometimes that happens slow, but it sounds like it's happening really quickly. And I'm just really proud of you and grateful that you're in our community. Thank you for doing this work.
We love this community. Thank you.
Councilor Varwig.
I hope I don't cry when I say this, but thank you. My dad was in the Navy during the Vietnam War, and I remember growing up wanting to know the stories. But he had a hard time talking about it. He didn't want to talk about it. And it's because of how he was treated when he came home. What you're doing isn't just for Vietnam veterans, Ken and Melinda. It's not. It's for their families as well. There was no way that I could let you go on that trip without giving you some sort of sponsorship. So it's truly an honor to be able to help you guys. But mostly, I'm in forever gratitude to you guys for helping people like my dad be able to tell their story.
Thank you. Sarah, thank you.
Yes, Council President Hensley.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. We've come a long way from you being our high school football coach to here we are today. I get to see your posts in our alumni pages and your books and your travel, and it's nice to see all of our alumni getting behind you as well. And it's kind of fun that we're kicking off this tour here in our town. And I am sorry, Milwaukee, but I'm glad we're doing it here. But yeah, a little bit in the same vein as Councilor Varwig. One of my dad's good friends his name's on the wall. So this is really hits home, and I really appreciate everything that you're doing to bring awareness and just, I don't know, I just have a lot of heartfelt gratitude to not just the folks that served and their families, but to you for what you're doing for our community and bringing awareness around the whole nation about this. So thank you guys so much.
Your Honor, before you, or after you take a vote, I guess,
if you could actually read it too, like you would a proclamation, I think that would be
That would be great.
that would be great.
Well, I will do that right now.
Oh, okay, perfect.
Can I have your computer, sir? So the resolution reads, whereas the Vietnam War spanned nearly 15 years involving North Vietnam and the Viet Cong in conflict with South Vietnam and the United States, along with our allies, ending nearly 47 years ago in 1975. Whereas more than 9 million Americans courageously answered their country's call to service during the years of the Vietnam War, many of them being deployed to unknown lands far from their homes and loved ones, and enduring the horrors of war while fighting to preserve our freedoms and way of life. Whereas more than 58,000 American service members never returned home, making the ultimate sacrifice in service to our nation, their names now being etched in black granite on the wall at the Vietnam Veterans Memorial in Washington, D.C., and more than 1,500 service members remain missing in action today. Whereas those who did not return home did not receive the hero's welcome, those who did return home did not receive the hero's welcome that they deserved, and instead were too often subject to abuse and treated shamefully by an American government and public that were deeply divided over the unpopular war, causing pain, trauma, and other consequences that have been long-term and intergenerational. And whereas the government of New Zealand in 2008 formally apologized to its Vietnam veterans who were deployed in support of our troops, a gesture that was healing for that generation of service members who had also endured abuse upon returning home. But the government of the United States has never officially done so. Now, therefore, it is hereby resolved by the Canby City Council as follows. The City of Canby hereby acknowledge and express our tremendous and undying gratitude for the dedicated service and sacrifices of the American military service members deployed during the Vietnam War, and to the many servicemen and women who supported them in their mission, as well as their family members and loved ones. Furthermore, the City of Canby wishes to apologize and express our deep regrets to our Vietnam veterans and their families for the manner in which their loyal service to our nation was not recognized as it should have been, when it should have been, and for all the unnecessary pain and trauma this may have caused. That's the resolution here before us. All those in favor?
Aye.
Anyone opposed? Resolution passes 5-0.
Oh, goodness.
Thank you.
Thank you both very, very much.
Thank you.
Next on our agenda this evening, new business, we have a park naming policy. So a little background, so this is something that
Dave Connor.
Dave,
I did, I totally skipped over that, thank you all.
we really want to keep Dave.
Yeah, we do want it. So before we move on to new business, how about we do ordinance number 1586?
That'd be great.
An ordinance authorizing the city administrator to enter into an employment contract between the city of Canby and Dave Connor. It's our first reading, and so.
Mr. Lindsay will give you.
Mr. Lindsay?
Yeah,
you're on it, sir.
I'm giving Mr. Archer a breather because he has so many other things to talk about this evening. So this is kind of a nice opportunity that PERS has provided to us through December 31st of 2024 by basically extending the right of, it used to be that you could only work back, if you were a PERS employee, you could only work back up to, it's 1,040 hours.
1,040.
Or you totally jam up your retirement and it goes away. So they have extended the ability for folks to work back up until that date. And so we have several folks who would like to keep working basically with the city of Canby. Dave Connor is one of them. He's been here 30 years. And so he's eligible to retire. And so he wants to take advantage of the idea that he can actually retire, kind of get that all lined up, and yet still come to work for us for the next 2 years, currently where PERS puts it. So, and as you'll notice, it does have some positive fiscal impacts for us in that what we have to pay for his PERS, we will no longer have to pay for his individual account contribution, which is 6% of his salary. So we're gonna actualize at least $6,000 in savings per year over those 2 years. That's a $12,000 savings. But what we've also done as part of this is we wanted to recognize when you retire, you lose all of your time off and all of your accrued sick leave. So, and some of it, there's sellback provisions and things like that, but we didn't want him to start completely zeroed out because seasonally the holidays are coming up and such. So we did agree within this, if you would agree with us, to give him its 40-hour start in a bank, and that there's a value there of $2,000. So we save, instead of $12,000 in this, we actually save $10,000 by doing this, and we get to retain somebody, and we get to know a date certain, so we can have a succession plan for folks who would like to come up and be the next Dave Connor.
So that's something that's, I was reading through this, I want to make sure, do we have a succession plan? And by plan, meaning is that person already been brought on or is on staff that we are grooming to take the reins here in 2 years?
2 years is a long time, but they do have folks that they would love to groom and grow into that, and people in particular. What I don't want to do is say we can never make promises about employment. And we always want to do a robust, competitive process, even if it's, say, just internal, so that anybody could have an opportunity to apply if those positions open up.
But we are working
yes,
with team members to get them.
Yeah, and they have a pretty good eye on, this is another way, thanks for kind of massaging this out, of retaining folks too. Because if you think that you're never going to get to go to the next level, you may look elsewhere, whereas now there are opportunities for people to kind of grow and bump up. So,
yeah. Great. Thank you, Joe. Question? Oh, you have a question?
Not a question, but I really want to say this is a perfect example of a win-win. What could possibly be better than this? We're helping our employee out, and we're saving some money in the process. So, and I fully support this, and I'm glad that it worked out the way it did.
Great. Thank you, sir. Any other comments or questions? No? Okay.
I move to adopt Ordinance 1586, an ordinance authorizing the city administrator to enter into an employment contract between the city of Canby and Dave Connor to come up for a second reading on November 2nd, 2022.
Motion's been made by Councilor Spoon and then seconded by Councilor Marine to approve Ordinance 1586, an ordinance authorizing the city administrator to enter into an employment contract between the city of Canby and Dave Connor to come up for a second reading on November 2nd, 2022. Any further discussion? Okay, seeing none. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed? That carries 5-0. Great, thank you. Now we'll move into new business under the park naming policy. So this is a little history for those here and on TV land. It was a request by the council. I believe Councilor Bangs asked that there was the creation, or at least the Park Advisory Board maybe look at creating a park naming policy or a renaming policy. And so what was in our packets this week was the work of our Park Advisory Board, putting together some criteria for us to use if that was something that we wanted to do down the road in terms of new park development or the renaming of existing parks. So this was done by the Park Advisory Board. It was given to city staff to go through and make sure that we didn't leave anything out, and it meets proper legal pieces if we needed that. And so what you have in the packet and before you is that draft. So did I leave anything out, Scott and Joe?
I don't think so.
So any conversation or discussion? Is this a piece to move forward? Councilor Parker?
Well, Brian, I don't know if you had time to see the email that I sent to you and Scott on this matter?
I did not. Was that today?
Yes.
I did not see that today.
One of those work days, eh?
Yep.
Well, I was notified that I like the policy. I think it's very good. The part that I think may have been left out is that there wasn't an inflection point with our Historic Landmark Commission.
Okay.
I think there is a presumption here that some, maybe all of the nominations may have an historic element to it.
Mm-hmm.
And I think these folks, it would just be something I'd like to throw out on the dais is their next meeting will be on November 7th. I don't know if there is a time necessity to pass this, but I think in the spirit of good relations among our boards and commissions, it might be appropriate to ask them to comment. I notice in the element here, it does say that public input will be taken, but we have such historic experts on our commission. I think that they might be able to give even a little more help on this. So, as liaison to that commission, I thought it was important to reflect that.
No, I think that's good. Council President Hensley?
I actually was going to concur with Councilor Parker. I do love the way it's written by the Parks Advisory Commission or Advisory Board. I love the work that they did on that, so thank you. But I always want to err on the side of more input from community, and I think that the Heritage Commission is exactly the board that needs to take a look at this, because there could be some historic elements that we could name parks after. So I think that is a good commission to have it go before. So I just wanted to agree.
Yeah, I don't think that's a problem. There's not really a burning time limit on that necessarily. It was
And
one
I'm
of those.
sorry I didn't catch this earlier.
Oh, no.
I only read the packet this weekend.
Nope, it's totally fine. I think that, again, it was an idea brought up, through conversation here on the dais. And so, no, I think having them have a look at it and, yeah, I'd be curious what they find out, or they know some history on some of the park names that we don't want to change or touch at all. So I think that's fine. I'll take that back to the Park Advisory Board next week and let them know. Perfect. So I guess for now, we'll just, yes.
I don't think this has to be in the policy. I think the policy is great. I agree with Councilor Parker about being inclusive of the Historic Landmark Commission when it's appropriate. I think when that happens, it would be really nice just with us moving forward. This doesn't have to be in a policy. If there's like a plaque that has the name that also explains the historic significance of it, I really love the idea of moving that way. It looks like there was some talk in the policy about plaques, but I think really including some of that historical information would be awesome when the park is appropriate.
Okay. Well, that's a good add-on as well. Okay. I will let you take that, Councilor Parker, to your group, and I will let the Park Advisory Board know next week about this. And yeah, that was well done. It was Terry Jones is the board member, and she's been heavily involved in parks most of her career, and so she really put it together and whatnot. So she did a great job. So this is good. Okay. So for now, we're going to move it through a couple of different pieces, and we'll circle back when we've got some more information on that. Great. Old business this evening. So item 8A is following up regarding revised city council goals. Mr. Archer.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I believe Maya's going to pull up some slides, and I'll give her just a moment to do that.
Water went down the wrong pipes. Yeah, I breathe water, and that's not good.
That causes drowning.
Councilwoman Farnham until the mayor.
There we go.
Until the mayor. Okay, stop.
We're a tragedy in Canby this evening.
My goodness.
Canby current on the scene for the reporting.
Once in a while, we're allowed to have fun up here too.
He doesn't overreact, and it's almost like he knew something.
I know. Somebody must have tipped.
Reserve on the water, Mr. Mayor.
Somebody tipped off the news about being here.
It's just
Will I be able to scroll with that?
Lot too.
Or just hang on to it? You can. Okay,
We're
All right.
waiting for slides.
we're ready. Sorry.
This is what happens when you leave the council alone. Yes, Mr. Archer, go
So
ahead.
thank you, Mayor and Council. Yes, this is a revisit to your currently adopted goals. So just as a reminder, you adopted your current 2022 goals that we're putting up on the screen here. This is the current version of them. Forgive the way it looks, it's a lot of text, but it's just for illustrative purposes. You've seen all these, they're posted in the room. You have those always at your dais
They're
now.
all in one spot. You want any down there?
Oh, yeah.
So you adopted these goals in April of this year. And then on August 31st, somewhat recently, we held a special council session to review a status report on these goals and to talk about sort of the priorities of these and any additional items that had come up since the time that you adopted the goals. There were some new initiatives that council discussed and whether or not to consider revising your goals. And so out of that work session, you gave some direction to staff to bring back a revised goals list that reflected what you had discussed in terms of additions or other changes. And so that's what I'm presenting you tonight. You can go to the next slide if you would, Maya. The other thing is you discussed not just the changes to your goals, but you asked, there was a request that staff would bring back a basically recommendation to you on sort of a prioritization of where we see those in the work plan, and I'll present that to you as well in just a moment. So again, forgive all of the text, but what we're doing here is just taking your current goals sheet, and we've added at the bottom of any of the sections, there are 5 goals sections, and then under those there are objectives. So the highlighted items on the pages that are displayed here are those new items. And so just quickly, I'll walk through that and remind you, and this is open for your feedback. This is what we captured, what I thought reflected your discussion, but if you'd like to revise that at all, we would be happy to do that. So first of all, on the second goal under aligned resources to address future community growth, at the very bottom there, we're adding explore planning toward future wastewater and municipal water needs for the city. So that's a long-term, looking at making sure we're working with our wastewater treatment plant as well as our Canby Utility Board to explore the capacities and the future needs. So we've added that as an actual objective within your goal. And then we jump down to the develop a more robust parks and recreation program aligned with the Parks Master Plan. We're going to be discussing that immediately following this item. And because there are a number of things that are either in motion or that we plan to work on, you had discussed adding some specific objectives under your goal so that it's identified as things that we're specifically working on. So those are establish a parks capital improvement plan with prioritization. We'll be talking about that in just a few minutes. Identify and plan for land acquisition, develop a dog park, and complete community park improvements. And those are when we're talking about the community park improvements, I think that reflects the more kind of near-term improvements that we've discussed recently that that are already underway. We're working on the land use right now, and we'll be bidding that out soon. So those are the items we've added there. And then in the last section, the enhance engagement and communications that represent broad perspectives. First of all, the second bullet down, council asked that we strike this from your objectives. There was some discussion about that, perhaps being something to think about at a later time, but not currently. And also there was some discussion about the idea that this probably will tie into another of our work plans that we've got in motion, which is our diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging strategic plan. So, and that specifically is an addition at the bottom of that section as well. So I think that deleting the Youth Advisory Council item would sort of work into some of the DEIB work that we're doing. We've noted, we've got bullets, single bullet kind of starred, and then the double is the ones that we're adding as of today's date or whatever date you adopt. This is just a draft for discussion. Depending on your feedback and whether you would like to approve this or make any other changes that we can bring back to you, we will, of course, clean this up and we'll create a new version of, we'll create a new one of those, and we'll laminate and put new placards up and so forth. So that's the, those are the additions or the changes that we made. I guess before I go on to the next slide, which is the priority discussion, I would ask for, I'll pause and ask for any questions or feedback, or if you have any other changes on that.
Councilor Verwick.
I don't love striking the Youth Advisory Council. I know we had this discussion, and I would like to make sure that it's somewhere. I think the youth are the future of our community, and so I want to make sure that it's part of something up there. And I don't know if maybe we could just combine, the last bullet and the second bullet, but somehow I still want there to be something for the Youth Advisory. I want to make sure our youth are involved, and I don't want to forget about them if we don't have that as one of our goals. I just don't love not having something about our youth on there. So, just personal opinion.
Okay. Yes.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. That's the same vein I was in. I don't want to strike it at all. I would like to remain with the Youth Advisory Council and not necessarily lump it in with DEI. I do believe that they are two separate subjects. And after coming out of the League of Oregon Cities conference, I actually attended a breakout session on Youth Advisory Councils. And I think that that is a separate and equally important sector of the community. And after having gone to the Boy Scouts with Mr. Mayor on Monday and seeing the interest level and the very, very mindful questions that we got from the youth there, I think that this is a viable thing. Just to, I think we should just unstrike it and leave it. We can add DEI, but I think we should leave the Youth Advisory Council on there as something to talk about in the future. If we take it off there, out of sight, out of mind, and I don't want it to get lost.
Councilor Spoon?
Yeah, I'm comfortable with that. I do think the DEIB strategic plan will address age, like the ways to engage different ages, but that's different than a youth advisory council. And so I think that we can do both. I don't know how much bandwidth we have for both, but I agree that we can at least leave it there, and so that it's not out of sight, out of mind. I do think that DEIB strategic plan will address engagement of different ages and making sure that we're fully engaged with all sectors of the community. But I think that's a completely separate thing than having a youth advisory council. And I don't want to lose that entirely.
Okay. So.
I'm fine with the rest, just unstrike what we struck. Or whatever that word is.
Thoughts on that?
No, I'm fine with that too. That's an important component that we need to keep in mind.
Okay. I guess everything else looks good based on our conversation on there in October, and I think we just unstrike that and that one piece there. Okay.
So we will we'll do that, and then it looks like, I mean, you don't necessarily have to I don't think pass a motion, but with your consensus, it looks like we'll take that lead and we'll just update these accordingly. and redistribute those to you and make sure those are ever present in front of council.
Okay.
And then we'll look at doing that again next time. And
Okay. Councilor Parker, you had a comment?
Yeah, I wanted to thank the mayor and the city manager for the process they set up for this year. Having done this 12 times, for me, this was the most robust and constructive effort that evaluated things, put them in an order, and gave staff, I think, a much better idea of how to head. I think the second year I was on the council, we struck one word. We spent 3 hours talking and took one word out. Ken Ryder didn't want the word diversity in there.
Yeah.
So that was the sum and total of our revision to goals.
Repeated many times, so it was a lot on staff's part.
So I appreciate the process. Where we are today is because of the process that you two set up. And, you know, a couple of us were groaning when we were going to go to another goal setting, hoping that it was going to be more productive. And this is the best one yet. So thanks.
Well, appreciate that. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Scott.
Yeah. Okay, so that was kind of the action item piece of it, and then one more slide. And this was my attempt, as requested at that work session that you held, to give you sort of a sense of, you basically said, let us know what you think, you know, in terms of how you can attack these and work on these and what priority. So what I've done is just taken that same list. It's at the top there, a 1 means it's a short term, would be it's either already been done or it's underway. A 2 is a midterm kind of a work goal, and that would be in the 1 to 3 year range. And then the 3 is a longer term. It's either kind of an ongoing or it's probably more in the range of 3 or more years. That doesn't mean we're not working on these things if it's a 3. It just means things will happen, but it will take some time to get to those. So I have assigned those numbers after each of the items as I saw it. I don't know what your pleasure is this evening, if you want to walk through that, or if you'd like to just review that and give me any additional feedback. This isn't per se anything you need to take action on. It's just more of a, where does staff see these in terms of the work plan and what your thoughts are. So.
Councilor Parker and then Councilor Spoon.
No, go ahead. So.
I love the prioritization process that you went through it. I think it probably helps all of us get a kind of a big picture, get our arms around exactly where staff is at with the number of projects. We asked you to juggle 30 balls at a time, and you can't always have all eyes on one ball. So this is, I think, really helpful in seeing that. It makes sense to me too. It's consistent with the work that you've been doing. And just, I really appreciate being able to see what's a 2 and what's a 3, because sometimes when things are a couple years out, you don't know exactly what that means. So no, I think this is great. I don't think we need to go through it line by line. I think it's just really helpful to get my arms around exactly where we're at with everything and what the future looks like.
Councilor Parker?
Yeah, I spent some time going over this, and I agree with these priorities. Of course, I'd love to see a lot of them happen earlier, but I'm glad our manager said this makes sense to me. And also, I'm wondering, having spent some time in our planning department, I love their big whiteboard that has all 50 of their projects and where they are, the idea of turning this into a Gantt chart. But the city charter says that's your choice on whether you do that or not.
And I actually, Councilor Parker, I appreciate that comment, and it kind of teed up the last thing I wanted to say, which was this is just yet another another step kind of in the building blocks of doing this work with you, and this is, I think, one of the more important things that I can do to help serve the council, which is to help you focus on what your goals are, make sure I understand clearly what they are, and then continue to review those with you. So we did talk about this a little bit at the work session. We did kind of a mid-year, it wasn't quite mid-year yet fiscally, but we did sort of a check-in. But what I would envision is something, along the lines of what you just said, Councilor Parker, but also perhaps even something like a quarterly check-in on your goals with you, where at a council meeting, I might take 10 minutes and just review status report, and then you can always provide additional feedback on, maybe we want to look at, let's do this first, and then let's worry about that other thing, a different time or whatever. So this is going to be a regular, I want to keep these in front of us if we can.
And what I'd encourage is that those that have been completed, do not take them off.
Yeah.
So often, we only take a look at things we haven't done. Mm-hmm. And I think it's important for us to realize the building blocks that we've had. We did a similar exercise in the city of Gresham when I was there, and I don't know, maybe this is a time locked in the past, but the idea of a United Way thermometer in the middle of the city on how much money has been collected, is that a past concept?
They've got that right now in Lincoln City, I think, going on for a project.
But the idea of how these things are progressing, and a visual thing says, a year from now, we'll take a look at it and say, well, things that we wanted to have in a 2-year period we haven't done. Let's go back to the council and say, do you want some more resources on this, or do you want to help reevaluate it? And I think this is one of the best things you've done. So thanks, Scott.
Thank you.
Council President Hensley?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Yes, I agree. Don't strike them completely off once they're achieved, because there's something satisfying and encouraging about that check mark by something that you've accomplished. So I like that. Unfortunately, my little, I don't want to be a Debbie Downer, but here we are in the end of October, and we're finalizing the 2022 council goals, which could potentially change come January, February, when we have our next meeting. We have like 3 meetings left of this year. So this should come to that next session and find out where we are and where we want to go, what comes and what goes off of this list. And I love that you have a prioritization kind of plan in your brain now, so that maybe we can have this come to us earlier in the year. But I get it. We started kind of late this year, but yeah, with 3, maybe 4 meetings left of the year, it's kind of like, but I'd like to see this same format carry over. This is great work. Thank you.
Councilor Rowe, anything? No? Councilor Marie?
Yeah, I really like to see what your prioritization is, Scott. Mine might be slightly different, but I'm going to defer to you on this. You're the one that has to do the work on these things for the most part. And, I don't think I would argue much on how you've set your priorities out. So I like it. And I like that it's in writing so we can look at it.
Yeah, I think, again, we tend to be idea generators up here, and I think what this structure does gives us guidelines and guardrails so that we aren't all of a sudden coming up with 6 or 7 new items at a council meeting that don't fall in any of these categories or these objectives, and then staff now has a new set of number 1 priorities to go through, but then this is our lens to work through to go, what is the capacity of staff? If the planning department's got 50 things on a whiteboard, and as we heard tonight with looking towards the economic development analysis and then the housing needs study that we're going to play into our comp plan, that's one of those 50 projects, and that's a huge undertaking, right? So I think it's important that, and I appreciate that we had Scott go back through and go, what is your bandwidth with your team and where does it fall? Because what we think is year 1, there might be a whole bunch of details that really put it in that 3+ year mark. So no, I appreciate that. It's good. So do you need anything from us, Scott, on this aspect of it, just in terms of just good job, good consensus, we've got a roadmap?
No, it's very clear, and I do appreciate the feedback from the different comments. That helps me to understand what you're looking for, because again, I really view this as a big part of my job is helping you stay focused on what your priorities are, and then working together to carry those out. But how we continue to monitor, track, and present that information I think will be a continuous kind of a refinement, and I'll be working on some things to bring you some different ways to update that more regularly.
Perfect. Any other comments or questions on the follow-up on that? Okay, great. Then item 8B is the Park and Recreation Master Plan implementation recommendations.
And it might be easier if I could, do you think the mouse will work from over here? Is it on presentation mode here where I can just scroll, or is it easier to do it this way?
Can you try clicking?
Well, while Maya's getting that presentation teed up here, I'll just kick it off. So, Mayor and Council, this is an exciting point in our time with this. What I've heard very loud and clear from the council, the Parks and Rec Board, the community is we want to do more, and we want to do better with our Parks and Recreation services. And I know that that's one of the things when you brought me here was to really focus on this effort. And so we're at a really critical pivot point here, and this next step is where we really put things into action with our Parks and Recreation services, and taking what ended up being probably closer to a 1.5 year long effort to get our Parks and Rec Master Plan done, maybe a little longer than we had hoped, but we got there. We got a tremendous community input. Our Parks and Rec Advisory Board served as our steering committee for the project and put a tremendous amount of time and effort into that. A number of those members are here tonight. A lot of input from the community, a lot of input from steering committees and or focus groups and different stakeholders. And it really led to where we have a product now that we can not just look at, but let's figure out how we move that forward. So that's what we're going to talk about tonight, as you've asked me to do, is you adopted the Parks Master Plan on August 17th. You also received, that same evening, you received a list or a recommendation from your Parks and Recreation Advisory Board as to here's what we think would be an implementation plan. So I've worked that into this discussion. I've given you that in your packets. That was included as well. The most recent version of that recommendation list from the Parks and Rec Board was included in your packet. And I'm going to talk about that a bit tonight. But what you asked me specifically when you adopted the plan was, please bring back an implementation recommendation for this. Take all of the information in the Parks Master Plan, everything that we heard and all the recommendations that were made in that. Take into account what the Parks and Recreation Advisory Board gave you, and then use my own expertise and background in this field specifically and formulate a recommendation to you as to how we can now go forward and do some great things with Parks and Rec. So that's what we're going to be talking about for the next few minutes here, and that won't hurt my feelings. Okay. So I'll just give you the next slide cue. So before we move forward, what I'm going to do is present this in kind of 2 parts, and that is first I'm going to walk through and remind you what the Parks and Rec Advisory Board gave you as their recommendation. So there's a few slides, and I'll just quickly kind of hit that. And then I'll move into, I guess, what you'd call the staff recommendation. It's my implementation recommendation to you. What you'll see is that the way they're presented is there's a lot of crossover, there's a lot of similarity. They all tie back to the Parks Master Plan, but it's presented a little differently. And the main difference is the Park and Rec Committee's recommendation to you presented it in essentially 3 phases, and I'll show you that. What I've done is distilled that out even further into 5 phases, the first 4 of which, so phases 1 through 4, are basically a 5-year CIP, capital improvement plan, which is really what ties this to how we fund those projects, how we budget for them, how we move those forward. So I know you're all familiar with the term CIP. It basically becomes our to-do list or our project list in a more formal way. So I would like to just walk through all this. Stop me if you want to ask me any questions, and then certainly have some discussion afterward. And then really I think what I'm looking for is either consensus or a motion to move forward, or refine and revise what I'm giving you tonight, and then present that to you at a different meeting with more of a formal CIP that you would adopt, and that would be our CIP going forward. So hopefully that all makes sense, but I think it'll be even more clear here. So if you could go ahead, Maya. So as I said, the first few slides, again, this was your Parks and Rec Advisory Board recommendations that were presented to you. They were also, again, they were the steering committee for the master plan update process, so they kind of played a dual role there. Go ahead, Maya. So again, what they did was gave you 3 different ways of breaking that down, and the first was in 1 to 3 year segment, the short-term goals. There are several of each slide, there are a few of each of those. So their short-term recommendations were create a new park on the Auburn Farms Dodds property, complete the Maple Street Park improvements that are still to be done. Envision a new Waite Park, and that would mean in this phase, what they're saying is go get a landscape architect, do the master plan, and create a vision, and then later we would develop that vision. Acquire additional parkland for a variety of different things, and that might mean looking at some different, not just privately owned land, but perhaps some publicly owned properties, and work with different partners on that. Next slide, please. I'm going to move quickly through these, so if you want to stop and back up or anything, just let me know, please. The next item is a dog park. Develop a dog park in an area that is fiscally responsible and consistent with National Park siting guidelines. Continue to expand a connected trail, also known as the Emerald Necklace, and develop that plan through the creation of a trails master plan. Invest in the swim center upgrades at such time that the city and school district reach an agreement for a longer term arrangement. Extend the park's maintenance fee an additional 5 years to sunset in 27, or such time that enough information is received from the SDC methodology. Next slide, please. This is the last of the short-term goals that they recommended. Other considerations, this is a long, kind of a longer paragraph here. I won't read the whole thing, but essentially this is about creating the recommendation that ties to creating a Parks and Recreation Department, which would include staffing, additional probably maintenance staff, a director, and some different types of staffing to actually have a Parks and Rec department. Additionally, this references the work with supporting the work of the Canby Area Parks and Recreation District, known as CAPRD. This might tie together to some of our priorities where there would be funding mechanisms or partnership opportunities. So essentially they're suggesting that we look at that opportunity. Next slide, please. Now we move into their midterm goals, the 4 to 6 years, and those are now complete the Waite Park plan. We've created a vision for that in the first phase. Now we complete that vision. Develop the Ivy Ridge Estates Park property. Develop an athletic complex and a community center, including aquatics and fitness center types of amenities. Continue to expand a connected trail, again, the Emerald Necklace. Envision a new community park. So that references our community park by name, the Riverfront Park that is called Community Park. That would be work with a designer, landscape architect to create a whole new vision and really look at the future of that site. Utilize public-private partnerships to build additional parks or enhance current parks, acquire additional parkland for future needs, And then the other considerations continue to make the Parks and Rec Department a priority. Look at the Honda pits, ball fields, look at maybe relocating the disc golf park, consider a rec center, and again, the new an indoor and outdoor pool is listed there specifically. Next slide. And then this is the last of the Parks and Rec Board's recommendation captured in the long-term part of their goals. That's the 7 to 10 years, and that is complete the community park renovation, develop an athletic complex and community center, including aquatic and fitness amenities, complete the Emerald Necklace Trail system, also including the Traverso property is acknowledged there. Develop the Willamette Wayside property to include river access to the Willamette for kayaks, paddle boards, other non-motorized types of uses. Utilize public-private partnerships to build additional parks and enhance current parks, and then again acquire additional parkland. And I think that is kind of a generic statement to just continue to look forward on what are our land needs that we have in front of us. So that is a kind of a summary of what they gave you. So next slide. And this moves into now my recommendations to you. And again, excuse me. What I've tried to do is lay that out in a way that that recognizes the input from the master plan, recognizes the input from our Parks and Rec Board, and it ties it to a 5-year CIP, and then it also goes out to the full 10 years, kind of the longer term. And so as I'm looking at these, again, the phases will be such that it will be phases 1 through 4 will be our 5-year CIP, and then phase 5 is the longer, up to 10 years work. So you've already advanced. So capturing all of those different things. Oh, and one other thing I've noted here, and this is in your staff report as well in your packet, is we have noted the objective tying back directly to the Parks Master Plan. So the master plan had a kind of the final section was the goals and implementation of action plans, and each of those objectives is noted by footnote on in the parentheses after each of these. So phase 1 is 0 to 2 years, and I have first item is complete master plan and initiate development of a new neighborhood park at the Auburn Farms Dodds property. Some refer to that as the Simnett property. We can get moving quickly on that. Complete development of a permanent off-leash dog park. That work, as you know, is underway. Initiate the Waite Park Master Plan process. That would mean going out with an RFP, hiring a landscape architect, begin visioning. Explore land acquisitions for future needs, including an athletic complex. Begin updates to finish the Maple Street Park per community input. And then the last in this one is working with the Parks and Rec Board, create a strategic plan and implementation process for creation of a new Parks and Rec Department. So again, this ties to that idea that if we really want to elevate and take Parks and Rec to the next level, we really do need a dedicated staff team to work on that. We do have a parks team, and this is not to take anything away from that, which is focused on the maintenance of our facilities and the operation of those facilities. What we're talking about is incorporating that into a full department eventually with a director and probably some recreation staff members, and really having a true full Parks and Rec Board department. So this is, in phase 1, I'm suggesting we begin to work on what that looks like, sort of start laying the groundwork and think about what the implementation looks like. Next slide, please. So also kind of finishing the phase 1 here is adopt an update to the Parks and Rec land dedication and system development charges, or SDCs. That is already in process. That's the latter part, the final part of the master plan process also incorporated this work. We haven't finished that yet, and part of the holdup is we need to have you adopt a CIP and say these are the things to include in the SDCs. So that helps us then complete that SDCs. Extend the existing parks maintenance fee. I note that that was completed by the council already. You did that by a resolution on August 17th. So we've done that. Execute a long-term land lease with the Canby School District for the location of the swim center and the adult center. I've also kind of underneath that put the point of we're not losing sight of the idea that I know ultimately council has expressed that you would love to own that property for the city. We would continue to have that conversation, but we are exploring that, and that is underway. And then the last is supporting, as appropriate, CAPRD's opportunities. That's the Canby Area Park and Rec District for boundary adjustment. That's something they're working on right now, and creating a permanent tax rate or some kind of funding mechanism that is specifically called out in the master plan. So we would have to work through what does that look like, what does that mean? Next, please. Now we move into phase 2, and this is the 2 to 3 years. So we talked about doing a master plan for the Dodds property, Auburn Farms. Now we will take that master plan and we will build that park. So complete the development of that park. Complete the master plan for Waite Park. This is not yet the construction phase. This is completing the master plan that would have initiated in phase 1. Complete swim center upgrades per, assuming that we've got a longer term arrangement in place. In partnership with the Friends of the Canby Adult Center, explore opportunities to upgrade and expand the adult center. That these are items that are kind of hand in hand with the city has certain responsibilities at that facility that we own, and as far as the maintenance, and then the organization that does an excellent job of running the adult center, the Friends of Canby Adult Center, are also working on doing some of their own funding and putting money into that from their endowment and the funds that they raise to upgrade that facility. Again, those are hinged on getting the longer term arrangement in place with the school district. Continue kind of a continuation of looking at expanding. This is an ongoing item in the goals and objectives of the master plan, and that is expand and enhance community member park experiences. So this covers a number of items in the master plan, things like exploring land acquisitions for future needs, including the athletic complex, doing a feasibility study for an athletic complex and recreation center. So we're going to initiate looking at those types of things, and this is ongoing. Next one, please, Maya. And then also in the phase 2, initiating a long-term trails master plan with a focus on connections to neighborhoods, parks, and trails, focusing again on the eventual completion of the Emerald Necklace. Begin implementing what we envisioned as a new Parks and Rec department. This includes sort of consolidations of operations, perhaps beginning to add some of our newer staffing additions, pulling under that umbrella the swim center, the adult center, anything that's recreation related. Start working on some recreation programming ideas and partnering and all those different things. So this is the first phase of that is let's lay out what that looks like. The second phase, let's start to begin an implementation process. And then the last is, again, just continued support of working towards opportunities to work with CAPRD if indeed that is something that will be of value that can support our efforts and their efforts. And then phase 3, now we are looking at initiating the Waite Park improvements per an adopted master plan that we'll hopefully have completed. Continuation of expanding and enhancing community member park experiences. In this phase, I'm noting continuing to explore land acquisition for future needs, but then complete a feasibility study for an athletic complex and recreation center. So we're going to look at actually completing that feasibility study. Completing a master plan for community park that will basically revision that community gem and begin working on what that's going to look like. And then complete a long-term trails master plan with a focus on the connections and the Emerald Necklace. Next slide. The next is continuing with phase 3 in the 3 to 4 years, complete and implement an ADA evaluation and transition plan for all parks and facilities. This is a requirement that we must do, and we're gonna address that. Continue to take the next steps on implementing a Parks and Rec department, and then the last piece again is just continued looking at CAPR. That just is a reoccurring. Next, please. So now phase 4. This is the last piece of our 5-year CIP, and what I'm suggesting here is we would complete the Wait Park improvements. We would, under the second bullet, we would actually begin exploration of location and funding strategy per our feasibility study that we should have completed for an athletic complex and a recreation center, and then initiate a strategy for those action items. So just continue to look forward on how we're going to implement that. The last is, again, complete. So within the 5 years, I'm suggesting, and this says complete implementations of a Parks and Rec department. So by this point, by the last year of the 5-year plan, I'm suggesting that we would have in place a Parks and Recreation department, that we've strategically implemented how that looks. And all of this, of course, is pending funding and how that all is going to lay out. Next one, please, Maya. And also in this last piece of the 5-year plan is adopt and implement design standards and asset management plan and park acreage standards. This is recommended also in the Parks Master Plan. This is essentially establishing standards that we don't have right now. Facilitate a goal setting with CAPR to help ensure that both the city's and the district's goals are aligned. And then the last piece there is update a visioning of the wayside properties based on the existing master plan. Next, please. So that moves us beyond the 5-year CIP, but what this takes us all the way out to 10 years. So the 6 to 10 years, these are the longer term plans. And what we've got noted here is that we continue to expand and enhance all of those future land acquisitions, looking at future needs. The big piece of this, again, is now in this second 5 years, we're looking to actually, based on our strategy that we've developed in our first 5 years, is to go out and actually develop an athletic complex and a recreation center per those recommendations. And then again, just implementing strategies for completion of remaining items that haven't been tackled in the first 5 years. The last bullet on this page is explore opportunities to implement a long-term trails master plan. That then becomes where we've done a trails master plan. Now we're looking to actually start to implement that and make all those connections. Next slide. Continuing on our longer term items here, enhance the logging road trail and connectivity. We would also include the Traverso plan in this. Continue the phase development of the Traverso property, I mentioned that. Complete improvements for what we've envisioned as the master plan for community park. So we would actually look to create the new vision for that park, and then implement the action items for the Willamette Wayside properties based on the visioning that we would have done in the earlier. And then the last slide here is a couple of items that are just considered ongoing, kind of continuous items. And these items really overlap with essentially all parts of the master plan implementation. So these would always be factored into things that we're doing. We'd always be looking at that. And those two items are explore opportunities for long-term sustainable funding for parks and recreation. So the whole premise of this Parks Master Plan is that we are going to be having to look at any way that we can implement this vision for the community. We have certain funding mechanisms already in place. We're going to have to continue to search for how we complete these. This is a very I think this is a very inspirational plan. It's also very doable, but we're going to have to be very creative and continuously look for how do we put these things into place, and then how do we maintain them over time. And then the last is provide a heightened focus on DEI and a sense of belonging. That will just tie into everything we do. As we just discussed in our goals setting just before this item, we're working on a DEIB strategic plan. That will be adopted at some point. Then that will also be acknowledged within our Parks and Rec master planning process. So that's the last of my slides. I moved through that pretty quickly and would be happy to answer any questions or seek any feedback. What we're looking for here is some type of council consensus on how you would like to take the next steps to move this forward. We can bring this back for further discussion. You can give me direction to create a formal CIP document based on these recommendations, or you can revise those and I'll bring back something that looks a little bit different that you might have envisioned different than this. Again, I want to acknowledge the work that's been done by the Parks and Rec Board on this. They've helped to frame a lot of this up, and I used a lot of that information, tied it all back to the master plan. This really is what I've seen in my review and in my analysis as those items that we really are the takeaway items from the master planning process that the community told us were their priorities and what they wanted to do. So everything ties to what we really think the community wants to do and is envisioning for our next, how we move ourselves up in our Parks and Rec services. So I'm going to pause there and allow you to ask me any questions or give me any feedback or kind of let me know how you'd like to tackle this next.
Scott, couple of things on my end. First off, definitely your wheelhouse. I mean, those of you that don't know, Scott's background was Parks and Rec at the county level, and so when we first started talking about how deep and long range we were looking, Scott's eyes got really bugged out and started, I think the phrase is geeking out on these kinds of things, and it's evident here in what you put together. So thank you for getting behind that and pulling that together. I look at that, that's a big list. That's a huge list. That's a daunting set of pieces that are on there. If you believe that these are achievable, I'll trust that and believe that, and trust and believe that they will fold in with the 50 other projects that are currently in the planning department's whiteboard. We might need a bigger whiteboard, but this is what we've been working towards. In all honesty, for this council for the last 10 years, and the Park Advisory Board, who I think half of them are here or more, we have been talking and talking and planning and talking, and this is the action. So let's get after it. So I think it's a great layout. I'm sure next week, hopefully the Park Advisory Board can take a look at this next week at their meeting and provide some input. I'll make sure that Barry puts that on the agenda to talk about. But yeah, I mean, I'm excited. This is great. So thank you.
Thank you. If I could just, to your comment, Mayor, is I agree with you. It is aspirational. I acknowledge that fully. But I do really feel that if this is what our community says they want and will support, I think with a collective vision and support from you, the governing body, the Parks and Rec Board, the other stakeholders that we work with, these are doable things. I don't see any reason that we can't accomplish these things. This is keep in mind, any type of plan is fluid and is subject to change and alter and adjust. It is all, of course, dependent on the funding, right? So really that's what it all kind of comes out, is that everything in here is going to tie back to how do we pay for it. Some of them are not as much funding related as, sort of like creating a management plan and some things like that. But most of it is about the money and how do we put that together. We have funding sources in place already, but we're going to need to be creative in how we do more. So I do believe that without creating this vision, adopting it and saying let's go for it, that's the only way we're gonna get there. So in as much as it's a pretty daunting task, we're up for it, but we're going to be talking a lot about how we can accomplish this and what that looks like. And every one of these action items along the way is going to be open for public discussion and council review, and anything that we implement is going to come back to you, and then we'll move forward accordingly. So it isn't as though we're just going to go off and do things without coming back and touching base and sort of monitoring where we're at. But it is all stuff that is doable, but is in some cases some of this is going to take a huge lift, and that's going to be a collective lift on with a lot of people, multiple different stakeholders. And if I didn't think we could do it, I wouldn't have brought this to you in this way. This is what our community said they would love for us to go out and see if we can achieve. We've got some great low-hanging fruit that we can go out and do, I think, relatively soon. And those are the things that I put in those first couple of phases of my recommendation, similar to what the Parks Board put in theirs. I don't see any reason we can't get it off and running quickly. And we've got, as we move through each of the years, we'll be looking ahead constantly and working to figure out how we're going to plan for those things. So I'm excited for the opportunity to work with you and Parks Board and the community and trying to figure out a way to take this Parks and Rec, these services that we do now, and take them to a whole nother level. Because I think our community is telling us this is what we would like you to do. So.
Great. Art, comment, questions?
I'm ready to make a motion. I move the council direct the city administrator to adopt the submitted Parks and Recreation Master Plan implementation plan into a formal CIP for council adoption.
Okay.
Second that.
Okay. Questions, comments?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I thank you for saying that you're going to take this to the Parks meeting this next week, and they'll have an opportunity to look at these recommendations and review them. But I do see that the chair and several members are here, and I'm thinking if there's anything glaring to them right now that they might want to bring up now before a week out, if you would, maybe give them the opportunity if they have anything to say. They may not, but I just thought maybe it would be kind to offer them the opportunity to weigh in now rather than a week from now.
Sure. Chair Johnson, any thoughts that you want to come up here or if not, you can shake your head no. Well, that's fine too.
You can noodle it for a week, but I just thought since you're here, if you wanted to say anything.
Yeah, I just looking at.
You got to come here. I'm sorry.
Thought you'd get out of that there, Barry.
I have to. Watching or listening to Scott go over his interpretation of our priorities list, I think it's pretty close to right on. I mean, I like what he said. I think it's doable. It does seem kind of daunting, but I think that listening to what the citizens have said, listening to what or knowing what has gone on in our meetings and what pains we've gone through in creating that priorities list, I think Scott's pretty much captured that. Okay. There may be some things that are little different, but for the most part, I think it's a good working document.
All right.
My opinion, but you may ask some of my other constituents.
You're the president.
Well, you'll have your chance at the meeting, but I thought since y'all came tonight.
And
thanks, Barry.
If I may, Mayor, and thanks for the comments, Barry. I spoke with Barry somewhat recently, and we were talking about that I would love to come and attend one of their meetings in the near future and really just kind of talk through this even further. And I think that's what you're talking about, Mayor. So I would be very much open and would love to do that. I do want to emphasize what we're trying to do here is just get something captured to formalize this so that we have an action plan in place. And that would be what the CIP does, is really moves us to that phase. And just if we can just keep in mind that can be fluid over time. So we can, as Barry just noted, there might be a few nuances that are different or whatever, and some of this we might find that, hey, we're not going to be able to get this one in this phase, but let's move it to a different one and kind of shuffle the timeline around if we need to on certain aspects. But in my experiences, if we don't capture this as an action plan and start working on it and say this, it's kind of like the council goals we were just talking about. We're going to put them on paper, we're going to keep them in front of us, and we're going to work towards them. And I think I would rather have a little too much on there than not enough to at least say there's a saying I like, it's you shoot for the stars and hopefully you'll land on the moon. That doesn't mean that we're settling for something second rate. I think it just means that we're really going to go for it and see what we can do. And there might be some realities to this that we'll have to adjust along the way. Sure. So I do want to urge that, that with that idea always in mind, that this is always up for discussion and revision and further refinement. But I think we can put this into motion and get working on it.
Okay. Did you have any other comment? No? Councilor Parker?
Three things. Thank you. This is exactly why we hired you. All of us have had ideas. Waite Park, Community Park, Wayside, what do we do first? And you have put all of these things in order, and you have used your judgment as someone who has built parks before on how long it's going to take. I take a look at the Waite Park thing. Mm-hmm. I'd love to have that fixed next year. But you're the pro, and you've got a process. That's one. Two, before this meeting, we had a consultant come in and give us information on the projected households that are going to be created in this city. And we do have a unique opportunity. If we, over the next 5 years, if we continue on track with the same number of households that we are building, that's going to be $6.5 million in addition to the $6 million that we already have in SDCs, giving us over $13 million in opportunity to do capital. The challenge will be the maintenance. Mm-hmm. But in terms of us being able to purchase some land and build some facilities, and we'll need our city attorney to help us keep within the legal circles on what those can be built, what we can use those SDCs for, how much can be planning, engineering, overhead. And third, I hate to put anybody into more work, but I'm wondering if there is a time in the next 5 years where the Parks Committee may need to meet more than once a month. We have the City Council meet twice a month, and there's been several times where we catch the off cycle. Mm-hmm. And saying, well, we'd like them to weigh in. Now it's going to be a full month and that sort of thing. That it's something to take into consideration that as we move ahead and we get to critical points, if it's in fact going to be another 4 weeks to make a decision and that sort of thing. Sure. I know nobody wants an additional meeting, but I'm just thinking we have talked about that, where with us having 2 meetings, Parks having 1. There's a bit of a mismatch, but Barry, that's your call.
Well, and in our history, our threes, when we were steamrolling along with the urban renewal district, we had 3 meetings a month. 2 of them were council and 1 of them urban renewal, because there was so much going on to take in.
Contracts and reviews.
Yeah,
and
so
proposals.
that very well may need to be the case.
And I wouldn't.
And I really would like to, we're going to have a lot of proposals come before us, and I really would like those going before the Parks Committee before they come to us. And there's going to be a lot of work for everybody in the next 5 years.
Counselor Spoon.
Yeah, I think this is great. Thank you so much for taking into account the thoughtful recommendations from the Parks Committee too, and really like intertwining them and giving it some direction with, in terms of how long we feel like it'll take to execute it based on your experience. I do have one question, and it's, so in phase 5, you talk a little bit about the logging road trail, and I know that there's a lot of improvements to be made there. I would really, one of them it says is seating. I would really love to see us not wait 5 years before we put some more benches on the logging road. I think that's kind of low-hanging fruit, and if you walk it frequently or bike it frequently like I do, there's a lot of people with mobility issues that would love a place to sit. So I don't, you know, but I think it's great. I think there's a couple of things that without doing massive overhauls of parks, we can do to make them more accessible. So I think, I don't know if that makes sense what I'm asking. I know that there's a lot more work to be done there, but I noticed last time I was walking it, there were some people desperately looking for a place to sit and no place anywhere near them to sit, so.
We're going to have more seniors.
Any other thoughts? Or I know we got a motion on the table, but just wanted to. Okay. So motion's been made by Councilor Marine and seconded by Councilor Parker. Thank you. And write it down. To move these recommendations to staff to do a CIP plan to bring back to council at a future date. Any other comments?
And I assume that'll take into account the feedback we get from,
Yeah, including the feedback from the Parks Board, yes. All those in favor?
Aye.
Anyone opposed? Okay. Scott, thank you. Great job. Mayor's business, Parks and Rec Board meeting is next week, so I'll report back in November. Clackamas County Coordinating Committee canceled its October meeting because of the League of Oregon Cities Conference, so that'll be the first Thursday in November. So I'll report back. I'm not sure where November falls, but hopefully for the first meeting. Attended the community meeting on the dog park piece. We got those notes back from those, like I said earlier. Hopefully everyone's had a chance to kind of go through those. I know that community meeting was really broken up like two segments. One was, more feedback and whatnot, and then the other one was about amenities for the dog park and whatnot. I partly for just, I'm not sure the purpose of my question, but I think maybe just nail this down in terms, we've had a number of people with feedback regarding this. I know most of us were at the meeting, the community meeting. What are our thoughts? I mean, are we moving forward? We've taken in a lot of input. We're waiting still. Do we have a traffic study back yet?
Do you want to? Oh, sure. Good.
Yeah, so Don Hardy just sent this today, so it's a very apt question, is that they, as far as the city side of the planning goes, and the traffic impact was negligible in terms of if we create that parking lot there, and because of kind of the delta, as they say, right, the change in use won't be significant either because people are already using it for a dog park. So the letter came back that would allow us to articulate to legal sufficiency that it would be a negligible impact on the traffic, and then therefore we could go ahead as a type 1 on the city side. We're still waiting on the land use deciders up at the county level.
Okay. So again, there's just a lot of back to us about in conversation here of other locations vetting conversation. I guess feedback. Where are we going? Stay the course? Do we vet other things or not? Because I want to make sure that I'll just leave it at that. You're green, go for it.
Well, I thought where you were going is having another meeting to take a look at the cost estimates we received in our emails, and a one-dimensional explanation is good, but I'd like to get Jerry and Jeff up here and walk it through. Okay. That there's a substantial change, substantial reduction in the budget, and I'd kind of like to get a qualitative understanding of what that means. Certainly it falls within the realm of the comments I was reading in the consultant's report about reducing the cost of this.
Sure.
And before I endorse that budget, I think I need another meeting to understand it.
Okay.
If that sounds reasonable.
No, that sounds reasonable to me. Scott and I can do that, is looking at upcoming agenda here pretty quick. So, I mean, that's something that can be done. And that was a big part of the conversation, was what's the cost? Like, are there, and I don't know, now that kind of taking that feedback, it seems like that list of expenses included some of the items that were talked about in the amenity aspect of the community meeting and whatnot. And so I think that's a logical next step, is to bring that back and have that conversation and see if that comes down to a reasonable or just changes the trajectory of the conversation. So, but I can do that when I'm seeing head nods, yes, as well. Okay. Mm-hmm. So Scott, maybe on Tuesday when we connect again for the next agenda, we can find room in that next agenda. Okay. Let's see. Last night there was the city council candidate forum at Cutsforth's town hall. It was a very well attended evening. I thought everyone did well, or three incumbents did well. So ballot drop officially was today. Mm-hmm. So be looking for those coming very soon. So please vote. And then draw everyone's attention to the Halloween Scarecrow event going on in our downtown, our now new, is it the 5th annual? Has it been 5 years that's been running now? 5 years, I think. The Scarecrow competition, so get a look at the Scarecrows and vote. And then on Halloween, there is the Trunk or Treat event downtown. So get your ghouls and boys and girls and come on down for
your ghouls and ghouls.
Your ghouls and girls and ghouls and come down. Trunk or treat.
Trunk or treat.
Trump.
Oh, trunk or treat. No.
Trunk or treat.
Trunk or
Instead of
treat.
trip.
Yes.
Trunk or treat.
Yes. You open the trunk of your car and
there's treats.
throw out candy.
Yes.
That's all that I really have right now. We'll move into council liaison reports, and I'm going to start with Mr. Marine.
Well, thank you. And I do want to mention the Scarecrow competition. I think that's great. I love seeing those things, and I'm still driving around the city looking for new ones. It's really fun. So I hope that's a thing that continues. I did go to the Canby Utility Board meeting. That was on the 11th. And there wasn't a whole lot that came up there, except for the fact that they are going to be doing a modest increase to rates. So, I guess we could have expected that. Their costs are going up, and so it's going to be passed along to the consumers.
Did they mention a percentage increase?
Yeah, it's not a straight percentage. There's a schedule. I can share it with everybody if you want. It's I don't have it at my fingertips here, but it was modest.
Okay, great. Thank you, sir. Councilor Farway.
I'll save my report for next time.
Okay.
Thanks.
Council President Hensley.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just a couple of quick things. Well, to your note, I absolutely think we should be vetting other locations. I was also at the dog park community meeting, and I did do the breakout session for a little bit, and there were 3 citizens. There was like 6 people in the room, but you can't count Councilor Banks and Councilor Parker and I, or even really Scott Sassy, because he's part of the Parks Advisory Committee, and Jerry Nelson's staff. So there were 3 other people in the room, and everybody else was in here. So I think we should be listening to those folks, and I think we should at least take a beat and look at other options. And Traffic Safety Commission, again, we had several citizens come and talk, and we had one gentleman that come from the south side. I'm not going to give addresses. He was on the south side, and we actually did have the traffic trailer go out and collected data. And although there was apparently a perceived speeding issue on that side, it seems to have calmed down now that school started. And so that's why they did the traffic data after the school started, and buses and that kind of thing. So there may have been some speeding in the summer, but it seems to have calmed down, and that we'll continue to monitor that. And but for now, it seems to be kind of resolved itself. But again, a lady came from Maple Street. We've heard from her several times over the years about the narrow part of Maple from Territorial to 21st. The county's been involved in everything, but now that we've taken that road over, it looks like it might get some traction and be able to help that neighborhood out, where there's just no space for pedestrians. It's very narrow. You've got a truck going one way, and especially with construction, and passenger cars the other way. It is a very dangerous section of the road, so that's being addressed. And once again, multiple people talking about the traffic situation on Territorial, both at Redwood and Pine. So I think that's going to be an ongoing conversation, and we'll hear more about that in the future, I think. And that's all I have this time. Thanks.
Okay. Councilor Parker.
Well, since you brought it up, I do think we need to be truthful to the citizens. If they don't like the traffic on Territorial now, wait until the 600 homes are built on Holly.
Oh, they brought it up.
And we need to come up with a strategy for Holly. I mean, right now, we do not have the tools to address that. You see the one subdivision that's going in, we got this very beautiful sidewalk, and we won't ever build anything on the other side because it's not in the urban growth boundary. We don't build sidewalks except when developers do. So from Holly out to the river, we're going to have a sidewalk on only one side unless we come up with a strategy. And the fact that it's county roads is going to really take some thinking. On what people think about the dog park at Territorial, I mentioned this last night, that I've started doing canvassing around the city, hit about 28 houses, and no one wanted a dog park in their neighborhood. They said they didn't want to hear dogs barking, and they didn't want strangers prowling around next to them.
At Territorial?
Anywhere.
This was in the neighborhood adjacent to the Honda pits. Now, one of the sad parts is that almost no one had heard anything about dog parks or parks at all. It's one of the things that Tyler's been trying to help out, but there's no getting around the fact that having a demise of our local paper is hurting communications, and I'm looking forward to our communications person trying to do that. But the fact that my little survey of 28 houses, 32 people, none of them wanted in that neighborhood, we have some serious questions about how we take out geographical bias in land use siting. You know, if we hold a public house and the people around Maple Street Park say, we don't want lights, that's going to be annoying to us. Do we not do it? we've got a public policy decision on where our leadership lies. If we're going to crowdsource this, we may never cite another recreational facility anywhere. Now, on to the fun part of this week. I was invited to participate as a volunteer out at the Canby Center. Nearly 100 people showed up to paint pumpkins for Indigenous Peoples Day. And I thought, because we're not carving pumpkins, it's going to be nice and tidy. You give a bunch of children a bunch of paints, and it turns out not to be quite so. And one of the things...
How quickly you forget.
How quickly I forget. And I just have to say what a gem the Canby Center is. And they wouldn't disclose the anonymous donors for the paints or the pumpkins. But I was working with this one family, and the fellow said, I've got 5 kids, and I wouldn't be able to afford 5 pumpkins. He said, this really gives us as a family something to do. And for those of you keeping track of my Spanish language lessons, there were 3 families that I worked with, and everything went great until the end when we were cleaning up. And a monolingual dad was cleaning up, and I was going to say, do you need some more napkins, which is servilletas? And I said, ¿Quieres más cervezas? And he nodded his head. So I think my Spanish teacher still has some more shillings in her purse for me. So that's my report.
That's pretty good, Greg.
That's funny.
Councilor Spoon.
Thank you. Well, I apologize for not being here for the community meeting about the dog park. I was stuck in Hurricane Ian, so could not get back in time. But I do want to address, I know the ladies that were here earlier that asked us to answer some questions for them. I was hoping they would stay because I wanted to address some of their questions. And then I'll address your issue about vetting, your question about vetting locations. So one of the questions that was asked was how many people in Canby have dogs? We know from the park's master plan that they estimate 45% of homes on the south side of Canby have a dog and 55% of homes on the north side of Canby have a dog. And of the prioritized list of things that people in Canby would like, number 2 was a dog park. Number 1 was trails. Number 2 was a dog park. And it was all these surveys were significantly statistic, but they're also but it's also in line with what we've seen over the last several years. In, I think it was 2016, we did a park survey. Matilda did one. And right at the top of the list again was a dog park. And this idea that it's something that people wanted 10 years ago and don't want now is really, the data doesn't suggest that's true. The data suggests, and what we know is that this is something that Canby has wanted for a long time, continues to want. And if you look through the Parks and Recreation Board meeting minute notes, I've gone through something like 12 years worth of them. The group that initially started the process to get the park at Territorial Road repeatedly came to the Parks and Recreation Board. You can see it in the meeting minute notes talking about that location. The idea that this location is something that was wanted 10 years ago and not now, is the meeting minute notes indicate that they repeatedly came to the Parks and Rec Board to discuss this location. But I understand and I empathize with people that don't want it there. I think the reality about a dog park is it's the second most desired park amenity in the community, but there's no great place to put one, and this is why. It's not a park anyone wants near them. You're bringing a bunch of animals, and it's not like a park where you can just send your kids to play on playground equipment. It's a park that no matter where we put it, there will be a contingent of the community that doesn't want it there. We know that's true about the Honda pits, that the people that live over there don't want it there. We know it's true about Territorial. And in my conversations with people, I think it's also true about Moala River State Park, that each one of those locations, which are the 3 locations probably most fitting for a dog park in terms of size, on land that we own, every single one of those locations is going to have a contingent of people that don't want it there. That doesn't change the fact that it's the second most desired amenity, which gives us a difficult decision to make, that we are going to have to site a park knowing that no matter where we site it, there's going to be opposition, but it's something that the community wants. So when I look at the different locations, if you want to talk about vetting locations, I've done significant research on all the locations for myself, and I've shared some of that with Joe and Scott, and they've shared it with you all, including the work I did to evaluate the Honda pits, the fact that a lot of people don't know that's actually an old landfill that was uncapped and unlined, and that when the DEQ did a study there, they said that it could be certain things. So it can be housing, it can be ball fields, it can be something else. I forget. I don't have it in front of me, but it listed 4 things that it was determined environmentally okay for. And then it said, and so then the state says, okay, well, no, if this is how you're going to use the land, no further studies done. But the consultant actually suggested that we do a significant study on it because there's a believed arsenic source on that site. We've never studied the groundwater on an annual basis to determine what happens to the groundwater as it ebbs and flows with seasons, right? We've never tested. We know that there's contaminants in the soil. There's a number of things like that need further evaluation. I would actually like to see us finally do the study that the consultant suggested we do back when that was done in, I think, 2004. That initial study was done that I uncovered that suggested we do a significant study over a year-long basis instead of that study was done at one point in time, but it doesn't track the rising and lowering water levels. What happens to that water? Where does it go, right? As a city, I believe that we have an obligation to do that significant year-long study because I think a lot of things could happen at that parcel. Joe, I don't want to speak for you, but when you and I chatted about that parcel, you kind of thought that if we were going to do anything there, we would really have to do like a level 2 study, right?
Yeah.
Based on the data we have.
What was done in 2004, 2005 was a level 2. I know it's getting late too, and this will be a further discussion that we can have anyway, but I mean, there are some questions raised within these studies.
And the recommendation was that we do additional studies. From the consultant, right? Yeah.
And if you go outside of, especially, and I think the other one was the skate park.
Oh yeah, it said it could be a skate park. So if we're going to have a parcel of land that people bring animals to that will drink the surface water, that will dig around in contaminated soil, I think we need to do a significant study there before that's really even a viable option. I think that when you talk about Molalla River State Park, I think 3 things. One of the things the Parks and Rec Board was really wanted us to do was evaluate all of the national siting criteria for dog parks. And I don't know if y'all have taken the time to do it, but I can tell you there's a number of siting criteria that the Parks and Rec Board advised we review that come up repeatedly, whether you're looking at the city insurance, which is our insurer, the insurance company that the city uses, put out recommendations and best practices. I think we ought to consider what our insurance agency says is a best practice when it comes to this. When you look at the American Kennel Club recommendations, there's no national park siting recommendations, so I looked at various different national organizations and their siting criteria. Here are some things that repeatedly come up on those siting criteria. One, that it be in a highly visible location. I would argue Molalla River State Park is not a highly visible location. That it's easy to walk to. I have walked to Molalla River State Park. There's no sidewalk. It's not safe. So I don't think that Molalla River Park meets that siting criteria. Both the territorial property and Molalla River State Park are not adjacent to residential zoning, which is a recommendation, which is also why I think the Honda pits are not an ideal location. And it also says that siting a dog park where there is an unofficial use as a dog park is a great siting criteria. And so we have Molalla River State Park has an official off-leash dog park that's unfenced. The property at Territorial is an unofficial dog park. I actually don't think people are supposed to have their dogs off leash on any city property, but I do think that it's well used for that. right? Like but the citing criteria that we were asked to evaluate says, if there's an unofficial use of land, then that's a great thing to make an official use of the land. That if you look at the citing criteria, it frequently goes into the fact that if there is a place people are using as a dog park, fence it and create a dog park. That's what the public wants there. I understand that there are people that currently use it as a dog park unfenced and want to continue to be able to run their dogs without a fence. This park is not going to be so big that the rest of the land at the Three Sisters property could not be used for that. I think we can do both things at the same time. The traffic study said that traffic was negligible there, right? So I understand that there is a sense that traffic is bad. I think everyone in Canby has a sense that traffic is bad. But the traffic data says that adding a dog park there will not significantly change the traffic that out there, in part because people are already using it as a dog park. So then just putting a fence up there, you're going to have some of the similar traffic. Most importantly, when it comes to Molalla River State Park for me, one is the safety and that you can't really walk there and that it's not in the city, it's not anywhere near the city limits. So that's, I think, a significant burden on our maintenance team. But also, I'm not really interested after what we have to, after the continued negotiations on the swimming pool and the adult center, I'm not sure that I'm willing to go into an IGA with another government agency and invest hundreds of $1,000s in land that we don't own and don't have control over. I think that there's a number of reasons that, you talk about we haven't vetted other locations. I have done my research to figure out what's happening at these parcels. I've done my research to look at the siting criteria, similar to when we cited the splash pad or the pickleball court. There's not some formal vetting process we go through to choose a location. It's our job as counselors to do the research and figure out what that location is. There is no formal park location vetting process, and I think that's some misinformation that's out there. We didn't have our process to cite the splash pad was to look at a list and all say where we thought it should go. I mean, we didn't even do site visits. We didn't, there's no formal vetting process. We had a community meeting about the splash pad that the community, I attended that meeting, was torn on where it should go. There was people that didn't want it at Maple Street. There were people that wanted it downtown. There were people that didn't want it downtown, right? I think this idea that we're going to get some sort of unanimous buy-in on citing something just isn't true. And I've heard some counselors talk about, well, we could spend less and have 2 dog parks, one on the south side, one on the north side. I'd argue we don't own land on the south side that's appropriate for a dog park. And it's going to take us a long time to get some land on the south side that's appropriate for a dog park. So I know that people are asking questions about, I just wanted to address the questions that were asked of us and that you asked of us in terms of whether or not we should vet locations. I feel like I've done a ton of research. I uncovered a lot of information about different sites, and we've, as a council, repeatedly said an IGA to invest capital on land we don't own is not really a direction we're interested in going. All of the siting criteria, easy to walk to, highly visible location. I mean, there's one site that is the best fit for the criteria we've been asked to evaluate. Okay, so that answers that question. Oh, and then someone said there's no utilities there. And I think there's a little bit of misinformation or misunderstanding, I guess is a better phrase. There are utilities on the road, right? So anytime you develop any property, if we developed the Honda pits tomorrow, we would have to stub in utilities. Utilities don't just exist on undeveloped properties, right? You have to stub them in. There are utilities at the road. This idea that there are no utilities there is going to be true of any site we evaluate, because anytime you're developing land, you have to bring the utilities in. So I understand the sentiment, but the utilities are right there at the road. We have a fire station and a wastewater treatment plant, so we have to have utilities there at that site. And then another question was, why don't we use the money for deferred maintenance? And that's a great question. So there's different restricted, there's funds that are restricted and funds that are unrestricted. We currently budgeted for up to $900,000 out of the general fund. I think this is an ongoing conversation. We haven't made a final determination on where the funds come from. I would rather use the general fund park money for projects like turf or lights where we can't use SDCs and build the dog park with the restricted funds that can only be used for park development. We can't use SDC funds, but if the dog park qualifies for SDCs, it always makes sense to use the restricted funds first. We set that money aside for parks, and there are a lot of projects that our community wants, like turf and lights, that likely don't qualify for SDCs. And I think that now that that money is set aside, that's a significant way towards putting turf and lights out at Maple Street Park, and it's already earmarked. And then we can do the dog park with the restricted funds. But the question about we can't use SDCs for deferred maintenance. It's not a legally allowable use of those funds. I think that is all of the questions that were asked from there and from up here, but that's why I support it. The community wants it. There's no perfect location that's going to get buy-in. I've talked to people every day about the location of the dog park, and I talk to people that really want a dog park, but I hear opposition to all of the potential sites, and significant opposition to all the potential sites, because I actively seek out, and I understand that people may not feel heard, but I also think being heard and does not necessarily mean that I'm going to agree with you. I assure you, I've read every comment that came through. I've read the packet. I've talked to people. I've had phone conversations and in-person conversations with people that don't want the dog park at Territorial. And I've had those same conversations with people that don't want it at the other two locations too. I'm listening and I hear you. Sometimes being a city councilor means making a decision that you know that's not going to be popular with everyone. And in this case, I think I still stand by the assessment that Territorial is the best location for the dog park. One other note, in my research on the Honda Pits location, I always assumed it was actually parkland. I don't know how many other people have too, that it was parkland. It's actually not designated parkland, and it's zoned M1, which is interesting because I think a couple of things. This is me asking for this to be a conversation at some point in time, because I think that there's some discourse we can have around this. We will never own a parcel of land that large, that close to the downtown core again. And I think that we should really do some thoughtful conversation around what that could be. One of the conditional uses of M1, for example, is a hotel, right? That's a conditional, it's not an outright allowed, but if you look at our M1 zoning, it's a conditional allowed use, is a hotel. Is that the right location for a hotel? I don't know. We have a lot of work to do at that site before we can do anything with it. It also might be an opportunity for another project like the Dahlia to get some more affordable housing, some apartments, some business there. We would have to rezone the property, but that's within our control. Or maybe it's best used as a park. I think there are a lot of things we could do with it as a park too, but I think there's been this general understanding that it's designated parkland, and it's not. And there are projects we've actively been trying to accomplish, like a hotel, like more housing downtown. And this is a unique opportunity to evaluate the use of that land, because it is such a large parcel, basically 2 blocks from our downtown core. And I don't think we'll ever have a parcel of land that large again, that close to downtown. So I think we should, maybe it's best used as a park. I'm not opposed to that once the studies are done. And I know that there's been a lot of talk about a pedal park down there or ball fields down there. But I think we should at least have the conversation, knowing that it's actually zoned M1. And if that's the highest and best use of the land, I can get behind it. But I think that that parcel of land deserves a conversation.
Noted. Okay, thanks. Did you have a comment?
I do, if that's okay. I know this is councilor comments, and I already had mine, but I have another thought.
Sure.
I appreciate councilors taking their time and doing research and unofficial polls and decibel readings and whatnot. I appreciate all of that, but I would like to have maybe the Parks Department and Public Works involved in these discussions and truly officially vetting sites and maybe having an inventory of the lands that we do own. There are probably places that we haven't even thought of yet. We always keep talking about the Honda pits and we talk about Malala River State Park, although those have risen to the top as the conversation pieces. I'm wanting to open up the conversation and look at where else could it be. I'm thinking about what we consider marginalized, for lack of a better word at the moment, parts of the community that maybe can't get all the way to Territorial with their dog because maybe they don't have a car and they're not going to walk that far and that kind of thing. I'm thinking that maybe a more centralized location or multiple locations. I just really think we need to take a beat and really look at this plan and see if we can do better. I believe we can do better for the community than this one location. And so I would like to just open up the conversation with staff involved. Appreciate your efforts, but I'd like to have some more expert opinions and a true inventory of lands that we have available to us at the meeting.
Okay.
Thank you all, but the applause is not really necessary or appropriate.
Okay. Any other comments, liaison reports?
I think we're good.
Okay. Thank you all, appreciate it. Mr. Archer.
Thank you, Mayor. 2 announcements. I'll be very brief. First is that our city, the Canby Disposal Company, our city garbage provider, is doing a community cleanup event. So that is free to anybody in the community. November 12th. That's a Saturday. They are doing this by appointment. So people interested, and they're going to send an announcement out to all of their customers. So I think everybody will receive this. They're offering that by appointment, and that's general refuse, recycling, and document shredding. So November 12th will be that date. More information will be sent out by the Canby Disposal Company. The second and last thing is a reminder to you, Mayor and Council, and then for our community, we are inviting everyone to our grand opening of the Grant Street Arch and the Quiet Zone. We'll be doing a ceremony and having some activities. This is on Thursday, November 3rd at 6 p.m. It is tied into our first Thursdays in downtown that we've been doing. So we're hoping that we'll have some energy already from that, and then others will come. The event will feature speakers, and we'll be in contact with, I think, Mayor and Council about how that's going to go. The other item is, or the other part of this is that we're doing a time capsule within the arch. And we have done some community surveying, but we are still finalizing what that looks like. We're not actually going to install the time capsule that night, but what we're going to do is have a table set up with some ideas that have already been presented through surveying, but also that will be an opportunity for, kind of a final opportunity for community members to make additional suggestions before we do that, and then put that in there. One note on that was that as far as the time capsule goes for the mayor and council members, I think it was Councilor Spoon that might have suggested at one point that mayor and councilors would each consider submitting a letter for the time capsule of just kind of what is happening in this time. We would love to encourage you to do that. I think Jamie's going to reach out and ask you again if you would be interested in that, and we can put those in there. But anyway, that's going to be going on. So again, Thursday, November 3rd, 6 p.m. at the Arch, and we'll have refreshments and other activities will be happening that evening. And that is all I've got. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Second opportunity for citizen input. 2 remaining citizens wishing to opine.
You have to fill out those yellow cards though, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. Action review, Maya.
You have approved, excuse me, you have approved the consent agenda, resolution number 1377, and passed ordinance 1586 to a second reading on November 2nd, 2022, and ordered the city administrator to come back with capital improvement plan, taking into account the parks and recreation recommendations from their next meeting.
Great. Thank you very much. I will take a motion to adjourn.
Second.
It has been moved and seconded to adjourn the evening. All right, all those in favor?
Aye.
Anyone opposed? Canby, we are adjourned. Good night.
Thanks, everybody.